Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Mollie Tibbetts. Mollie Tibbetts was a vibrant young woman born in San Francisco on May 8, 1998, to Rob and Laura Tibbetts. She had two brothers, Jake and Scott. Mollie was fortunate to grow up with loving parents and began to excel in school shortly after starting second grade. Life presented Mollie with an unexpected challenge. Things were going well for her and her parents until they decided to divorce. In 2007, Mollie moved to Brooklyn, Iowa, with her mother and brother. Brooklyn was her mother's hometown, and Mollie now had the opportunity to experience her teenage years in this quiet town. The move was difficult for Scott, Jake, and Mollie, but their caring parents provided essential support. Their father, Rob, maintained a close relationship with his children. Although he couldn't be there all the time, he was determined to do everything he could to help them. Brooklyn is a small town with a population of only 1,400. Life there is calm, a stark contrast to the hustle and bustle of San Francisco. Mollie and her two brothers have adapted perfectly to their new home. Mollie plans to continue her studies at Brooklyn College. She is a sociable person who makes many friends. Mollie is smart, energetic, positive, and cheerful. In 2015, Mollie met a senior named Dalton Jack at her Brooklyn school, and she instantly liked him. This encounter took place on a chilly October evening while Dalton and his friend were sitting in a pickup truck after playing football. A few younger students approached them, including Mollie. Dalton was immediately taken with her. She made him laugh and he found her beautiful. They exchanged phone numbers and soon began having lunch together and going to the movies. From that point on, they fell in love and Dalton considering her his everything. Mollie and Dalton's love for each other deepened over time. 2 years later, when Mollie moved from Brooklyn to study psychology at the University of Iowa, she maintained her relationship with Dalton. While she was in Iowa, Dalton stayed in Brooklyn to pursue a career in construction, but this did not affect his feelings for her. They managed to see each other almost every weekend and even on some weekdays. Her freshman year at university passed quickly. By the end of May 2018, she returned to Brooklyn for the summer. During her break at home, Mollie kept herself busy throughout the day. She worked at a local children's day camp at Green Regional Medical Center, and in the evenings, she participated in activities to prepare for her sophomore year. Mollie also made time to go jogging almost every evening. She split her time between her mother's house and her boyfriend Dalton's house on the western edge of Brooklyn. Unlike university students, Dalton didn't have a summer vacation and worked most weekdays. His construction work is sometimes local and sometimes he works across the state. On July 18, 2018, Mollie visited Dalton's house. Dalton lived there with his brother and their dogs. But both of them worked away from home. Dalton was working on a project on Highway 61 near Oak. Mollie agreed to take care of the dogs and stay at Dalton's house to work and study. It was a hot day, so Mollie stayed inside with her dogs and her laptop, hoping for a cooler temperature. The day seemed normal. She spent her free time chatting with her boyfriend on the phone, looking for something to eat, or engaging in conversations on Twitter. As the sun set, the weather cooled down. This is a good time for Mollie to go for a run. Around 7:30 p.m., she left her laptop open, sent Dalton a selfie, put on her workout clothes, and headed to the cornfield for her workout. However, Mollie never returned. She was missing that night. Dalton, who had not heard from her that night, assumed she was just busy and had gone to bed. But the next morning, when Mollie's messages remained unanswered, he began to worry. He contacted friends to ask if they had heard from Mollie, but they had no idea where she was. All of her social media accounts are inactive. The panic really began when her boss called Dalton to find out why she had missed work. Mollie was always on time for her job and had never missed a day before, so her absence was unusual. Dalton was worried and wondered what could have happened to her. Her silence made Dalton, her family and friends feel uneasy. By the end of the day, the police and the local community were mobilized to search for Mollie. Missing posters were quickly plastered around the city and surrounding areas. Shortly after, Mollie's father Rob flew from California to join the search efforts. In mid-July, Iowa was experiencing hot summer days, and the surrounding cornfields made visibility difficult. Police announced on television that the search for Mollie is ongoing. While there are no new updates, the search continues. Mollie, a 20-year-old University of Iowa student, went missing last Wednesday in Brooklyn. She was last seen by her neighbor jogging with her dogs, wearing shorts, a sports bra and sneakers. At the time, Mollie's whereabouts were unknown. The only confirmed sighting was when a neighbor saw her running east of town that evening. Police had no further leads. As the weeks passed, the reward for information about Mollie had increased significantly to nearly $400,000. They even created a website to encourage the public to share any information about Mollie. Police also analyzed data from Mollie's fitness tracker to determine her running route. Despite all the efforts, the investigation remained unsolved until mid-August. A person in northeast Brooklyn was reviewing surveillance footage when she noticed something unusual. Concerned, she reported her findings to the police, leading to a crucial discovery. The footage showed a 1951 Chevrolet with chrome side mirrors and handles. Initially, nothing unusual appeared, but the car returned and appeared on surveillance cameras multiple times. Then, at 8:07 p.m., the same Chevrolet was recorded again, this time speeding away. Based on the footage, the car, which was behaving erratically at the same time and place that Mollie went missing, caught the attention of the police. They began searching for the car in the small town. They quickly located it. A day after reviewing the video of the black Chevrolet, deputy sheriffs spotted the vehicle on the road. Instead of stopping immediately, he followed the car until the driver stopped. The deputy sheriff approached the driver's window and identified him as John Bath. When asked about Mollie's disappearance, John claimed he had no knowledge of her and was not involved. He was allowed to leave, but his freedom was short-lived. Just 2 days later, police officers visited John's workplace at a dairy farm and noticed he was now driving a different car, which belonged to his girlfriend. At this point, the police began to take notice of John, but they had no evidence that he was involved in Mollie's disappearance. The police took John to the local police station for further questioning. Although John was not required to answer their questions, he chose to cooperate. The interrogation lasted several hours, and ultimately, John confessed. However, his real name was Cristhian Bahena Rivera, and he lived and worked in rural Polk County near Brooklyn. Originally from Mexico, he had entered the United States illegally at the age of 17. Because he could not work legally, he was not registered in any official system, including at his job on a farm near Brooklyn. During questioning, police asked Cristhian if he knew where Mollie was, and he admitted that he had seen her the night she disappeared. He explained that he had noticed her before deciding to approach her. When he ran over to strike up a conversation, Mollie did not respond. When he persisted, she took out her phone and warned him to leave or she would call the police. The next day, August 21st, after more than 10 hours of questioning, Cristhian agreed to lead the police to a remote area outside of Brooklyn. When the police arrived and got out of their car, they found Mollie's body. She was lying under some corn stalks, wearing only a sports bra and socks. Cristhian confessed that when he confronted Mollie and she threatened to call the police, he acted out of anger and ended up killing her, then hiding her body in a cornfield. Mollie suffered between 7 and 12 stab wounds to the chest, ribs, neck, and skull, ultimately leading to her death. This tragic news has left Mollie's family, friends, and acquaintances heartbroken. As they learned more about the circumstances of Mollie's death, their grief turned to anger. On August 22, Cristhian was charged with first-degree murder. Concerns that he might flee led to his bail being raised from $1 million to $5 million. As the investigation into Mollie's disappearance turns into a murder case, developments related to her case continue to surface both in public and in the media. The following month, Cristhian denied any involvement in the case, despite initially confessing to Mollie's murder. He later recanted his confession. Police made significant progress in the case. They searched Cristhian's black Chevrolet and discovered blood in both the trunk and on the rims. Testing revealed that the blood belonged to Mollie, indicating that she had been in Cristhian's trunk that night. A series of bureaucratic delays postponed the court case. The public trial of Cristhian was delayed for several months and moved to another county for safety reasons. In August 2019, Cristhian's defense team submitted a 20-page motion arguing that his confession should not be used as evidence. They claimed he was not properly informed of his Miranda rights because of his foreign nationality. This means that although he admitted to killing Mollie, he did not receive a warning that anything he said could be used against him in court. Therefore, his confession could not be used as evidence. In addition, the judge postponed Cristhian's trial until 2020 to allow more time to review the case. In 2020, the trial was postponed again. On May 17, 2021, Cristhian Bahena Rivera's trial finally began. His defense team argued that the police had violated his rights before charging him with murder. They claimed that the police had used illegal interrogation methods to force Cristhian to confess. When this approach failed, the defense attempted to blame Mollie's boyfriend, Dalton, claiming that he had cheated on her 3 years earlier and then killed her. However, Dalton had a solid alibi for the time of Mollie's disappearance. Although he was absent from work for nearly 2 hours, several co-workers were able to confirm his whereabouts during that time, and it was clear that he loved Mollie very much. Cristhian eventually testified, but he changed his story. He claimed that 2 armed men came to his house, forced him to drive them until they found Mollie, then killed her and forced him to drive to a cornfield, threatening his son's life if he revealed what had happened. Cristhian's confession, the surveillance footage, Mollie's blood found in the trunk of his car, and his own incredible story all pointed clearly to his guilt. On Friday, May 28, Cristhian Bahena Rivera was convicted of murdering Mollie Tibbetts. After just 7 hours of jury deliberation, Cristhian was found guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. After the verdict, Cristhian's girlfriend, who had been raising their son Will, disappeared from Brooklyn, leaving his son on the farm without a family. With nowhere else to go, Will was eventually adopted by Mollie's mother, Laura. This adoption allowed Will to continue his education and move toward a brighter future. Her parents consistently chose love over hate, which helps explain Mollie's positive character. The support didn't end there. Hundreds of people came together at the University of Iowa to celebrate Mollie's memory. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Dorothy Stratton. Dorothy Ruth Stratton was born on February 28, 1960, in a neighborhood in Vancouver. Her parents were of Dutch descent and moved to Canada a year after she was born. The Stratton family later expanded with the birth of a son named John, and 7 years later, Dorothy had a younger sister named Louise. Her family lived a simple life. Dorothy was a good student. During her childhood, she did not dream of becoming famous or aspire to have a brilliant career. She only wanted to have the basic things that her poor family could not provide. In 1977, Dorothy started working at a fast food restaurant called Dairy Queen while she was still in high school. At that time, she was 17 years old, with blonde hair, a charming face, and a tall figure that attracted a lot of attention. Not only young boys but also older, wealthy men were drawn to her beauty. One evening before the diner closed, Paul Snyder, a charming young man, walked into Dorothy's workplace. Paul was quickly attracted to the young and attractive Dorothy. After ordering and paying, Paul handed her a large bill. When Dorothy said she couldn't give him the change, Paul laughed and offered her the money on the condition that she go on a date with him immediately. Dorothy agreed. Paul Snyder, 26, was a prominent figure in Vancouver. He managed and scouted models for clubs. He had many friends and connections across Canada. When Paul saw Dorothy, 17, with her blonde hair and charming smile, he immediately recognized her great potential. Paul asked Dorothy out on a date to a fancy restaurant and gave her a red evening gown. She later wore the dress to her high school prom. Paul and Dorothy began their relationship. Although Paul was 9 years older than she was, her parents did not object to their relationship. A few months into their relationship, Paul persuaded Dorothy to participate in a daring photo shoot. She was initially uncomfortable, but Paul convinced her that she had the potential to become a successful model and earn a considerable income. Dorothy eventually agreed to Paul's proposal. Paul found a studio and hired a professional photographer to take pictures of Dorothy. After completing the photo shoot, he sent the photos to the famous Playboy magazine. Dorothy's photos made a strong impression. A Playboy editor invited her to Los Angeles. However, Paul knew that Dorothy's parents would not approve of her working for such a provocative magazine. So he forged Dorothy's mother's signature, claiming that Dorothy's mother had given her permission to sign a contract with the magazine. In the summer of 1979, Paul and Dorothy went to Hollywood. By August, Dorothy had become Playboy's Playmate of the Month and began working as a bunny at the Playboy Club. However, she felt pressured by the attention and was not used to her new role. She also found it unsettling that wealthy men were infatuated with her and spent time with her. Paul Snyder was always by Dorothy's side, always willing to help her. He was in charge of taking care of every aspect of Dorothy's life, from organizing her schedule to signing contracts. However, she also felt completely controlled by Paul. To strengthen their relationship, Paul proposed marriage, and Dorothy finally agreed after some consideration. The reason she accepted the proposal was that she felt she owed him after all that Paul had done for her. In Dorothy's eyes, if it weren't for Paul, she might still be a waitress living off tips. She always felt that if she had never met him, her life would have been boring, working at the diner. However, Dorothy's family had doubts about this decision as they thought that Paul was using Dorothy for profit. Therefore, they warned her against marrying him. In 1979, the same year that Paul proposed, they held a minimalist wedding in Las Vegas. After the simple wedding in 1979, Paul and Dorothy continued to pursue their careers diligently. Dorothy also started filming, where she received recognition from directors not only for her beauty and charm but also for her real acting ability. As Dorothy's fame and fortune grew, she used her earnings to buy a spacious home in Los Angeles, where she lived with her husband. Paul Snyder was pleased with his wife's accomplishments, boasting to friends that Dorothy's growing fame was a shared success. As Dorothy's manager, Paul was always present at her photo shoots and events, overseeing their finances and assets. He also closely monitored her diet, clothing choices, and alcohol consumption at social gatherings, occasionally giving her guidance on which influential people to associate with to advance her career. There was much speculation that Dorothy had an affair with Hugh Hefner, the editor-in-chief of Playboy magazine. However, Hugh denied these claims, insisting that Dorothy was not a woman of loose morals. Over time, Dorothy began to realize that her husband Paul was controlling her life too much. Dorothy appointed a new professional manager and began to exclude her husband from photo shoots, inventing various excuses. The distance between the couple grew, and sensing this, Paul's mental state deteriorated. He became jealously protective of his wife, even hiring a private investigator to monitor her actions. However, no evidence of guilt was ever produced. Paul began to impose restrictions on his wife's clothing, not allowing her to wear provocative clothes and preventing men who did not benefit the family financially from admiring her. He incited conflicts and, in moments of anger, even resorted to physical violence. Dorothy found herself unable to tolerate her husband's aggressive outbursts and increasingly sought to distance herself from him. Friends and colleagues observed growing troubles in Paul and Dorothy's marriage. Playboy staff frequently advised her to end her relationship with her husband. While Dorothy was busy with photo shoots, Paul lived in their home, using his wife's earnings and indulging in idleness. One day, he discovered that Dorothy had set up a company in her name and was actively investing in it. The move, advised by her manager, was strategically arranged so that, in the event of a divorce, Paul Snyder would have no claim to the money. Paul's behavior escalated into more scandal as he sought his influence over his wife diminish. As Dorothy rarely returned home, Paul began to realize that his control over what he considered his golden ticket was slipping away from him. In the spring of 1980, at a gathering at the Playboy Mansion, 20-year-old Dorothy met 40-year-old film director Peter Bogdanovich, a close associate of Hugh Hefner. Peter was charmed by Dorothy and invited her to star in his upcoming comedy. Everyone laughed, and Dorothy accepted the offer to play a mistress. On March 22, Dorothy set off alone to New York to shoot the comedy. She lied to Paul, telling him that the director had forbidden anyone other than the cast and crew from being on the set. In fact, she feared that Paul might cause a disturbance during filming. Furthermore, Dorothy asked her manager to filter calls from her domineering husband while she was on set. In New York, Dorothy found herself infatuated with Peter, and a passionate affair blossomed between the actress and the director. Dorothy exuded joy at being with the new person in her life, not wanting to miss out on the opportunity with a sophisticated, wealthy, and influential director. Her attitude towards her husband became distant and cold. Dorothy spent 2 months in New York, and during this time, Paul was left alone in their large home in Los Angeles. Sometimes Paul brought other women home, who were shocked to discover that Paul was being unfaithful to such a gorgeous wife who was also a Playboy model. In April 1980, Dorothy returned to California to attend the Playboy Awards. She won the prestigious title of Model of the Year and appeared on the cover of the magazine, winning a new award. As part of the recognition, she received a lavish gift from Playboy, a Jaguar sports car, and a cash prize of $200,000. She developed a close friendship with Hugh Hefner, the editor-in-chief, who had high hopes for her. After the ceremony, Dorothy embarked on a 2-week promotional tour across Canada. During the weekend, Dorothy attended a party with director Peter. Meanwhile, she was planning to spend the final part of the tour with her family in Vancouver. However, Paul found out about these plans and immediately traveled to Vancouver, where he had experience managing clubs and numerous connections. During Dorothy's brief break, Paul coerced her into working in clubs and kept all the profits. This period led to a significant conflict between the couple. Dorothy was in tears, contemplating giving up her career to salvage the marriage. She expressed a desire to return to her parents' house with Paul and start a new life. Paul dismissed this idea. After the tour in Canada, Dorothy returned to New York to continue filming while avoiding her husband. At one point, she phoned Paul and requested some space in their relationship. Paul became depressed and angry with Dorothy. At the time, he was having an affair with a girl under the age of 18. The girl looked like a model, and Paul wanted to transform her into the next Playboy bunny. However, He soon realized that his young lover could never surpass his wife. In June 1980, on their first wedding anniversary, Paul received a heart-wrenching letter from Dorothy, in which she expressed her desire for a divorce and her intention to stop supporting him financially. This convinced Paul that his fears of Dorothy's infidelity were justified, especially as he suspected she was involved with director Peter Bogdanovich. To gather evidence of his wife's infidelity, Paul hired a private investigator. On one occasion, he called Dorothy's manager and threatened to cause trouble or even do something more serious. The manager advised Dorothy to hire bodyguards and be cautious around Paul. However, Dorothy ignored this advice. Without a green card and lacking permanent residence in the United States, Paul struggled with employment and finances. Facing the risk of running out of money, he withdrew all the funds from his and Dorothy's joint bank account. Consequently, he also sold Dorothy's valuable assets, including collectibles, jewelry, and the Jaguar sports car that Playboy had given her, all at low prices and only for cash. Furthermore, he began renting out rooms in their large house to friends, partly due to depression and loneliness. Gradually, Paul began contemplating a return to his native Canada. In mid-July, filming for the movie in which Dorothy was starring was completed. After that, Dorothy and director Peter Bogdanovich went on a 10-day vacation to England. Upon returning to Los Angeles on July 30th, Dorothy decided to move into the director's mansion in the affluent neighborhood of Bel Air. Meanwhile, Dorothy's ex-husband Paul was plotting his revenge. On the afternoon of July 31st, he borrowed a gun and went to Peter Bogdanovich's house at night. He hid near the gates of the mansion, determined to shoot anyone who came near. After hours of fruitless waiting, Paul became desperate and drove to a mountain area overlooking Los Angeles. During his time alone there, he was plagued by painful thoughts of suicide. When he returned home late at night, Paul still harbored hopes of reconciling with Dorothy. A week later, on August 8th, he convinced Dorothy to meet him at his house. However, Dorothy had changed significantly since their separation. She had become a confident woman with a newfound charm and was no longer affected by Paul's words. Dorothy told Paul that she was in love with another man and wanted a divorce. Paul remained calm and asked her to come back in a week to discuss the breakup amicably. However, the next day, Paul attempted to purchase a gun. He visited several stores but was unable to buy one because he was a Canadian citizen. Paul asks his private investigator to purchase a rifle for self-defense and home security reasons, but the private investigator advises against it and refuses to assist. On August 11th, Paul finds an ad in the newspaper for an old 12-gauge shotgun for sale. He decides to go to the San Fernando Valley to check it out and possibly purchase the shotgun. However, he gets lost and cannot find the address, so he returns without the shotgun. 2 days later, on August 13th, Paul returns to the same location and finds the seller. He purchases the old shotgun and tells the seller that he will use it for hunting. On August 14th, Paul asks his roommate to leave the house so he can talk to his wife, Dorothy, in private without interruption. Dorothy's managers and assistants advised her to accompany them to the meeting or to resolve the issues over the phone. However, Dorothy decided to go alone. She brought a large sum of money to express her gratitude to Paul for his past help. She hoped that the meeting would be peaceful and that she could maintain a friendly relationship with Paul. Dorothy planned to have a short meeting with Paul, so she scheduled a photo shoot for that evening. At noon on August 14th, Dorothy went to meet Paul at his home. Upon arrival, Dorothy received a safety check call from her manager. They had previously set up a specific code for her to use if she encountered any problems. After assuring the manager that everything was fine, the call ended. However, the conversation between Dorothy and Paul gradually became tense and escalated into a dispute. In a sudden fit of rage, Paul pulled out a gun and shot Dorothy in the face. After causing Dorothy's death, Paul seemed to lose control of himself and behaved strangely. He eventually took his own life. At 8 p.m., Dorothy's roommates returned home and found her car parked in front of the house. When they entered the house, they saw Dorothy's handbag in the living room and thought that Paul and Dorothy had made up. They assumed the couple was in the bedroom, so they decided to retreat to their own room and keep quiet. Dorothy's managers became increasingly worried when they could not reach her by phone. They finally managed to contact Paul and Dorothy's roommate at 11 p.m. After a brief conversation, the roommates decided to check out the situation in the master bedroom. When they entered, they witnessed a horrifying sight. Both Dorothy and Paul had died. According to the autopsy, Dorothy Stratton, 20, died about an hour after she arrived home. Dorothy's husband, Paul, died about an hour after his wife's death. Hugh Hefner was one of the first people to be informed of the tragic event. He called his friend Peter Bogdanovich and broke the news of Dorothy's death. When Peter heard that Dorothy had died, he was so shocked that he fainted. He then spent a long time on sedatives to overcome his pain and grief. As a result, Playboy magazine was sent out for publication before the editors knew about it, so the August cover was not changed. Consequently, the magazine was published with a picture of Dorothy Stratton, who had tragically passed away. However, for the annual Playboy issue, her image was replaced with that of another model. Peter Bogdanovich was responsible for organizing and financing Dorothy Stratton's funeral. The loss of his lover had a profound impact on him. He decided to cremate her remains, which were then buried in a Los Angeles cemetery. After the tragic death of the model, the film studio decided not to release They All Laughed, the comedy in which Dorothy had starred. Determined to promote the work, Peter bought the film rights with his own money. The comedy, They All Laughed, was finally released in 1981. Despite his efforts, the film did not receive significant praise and failed to attract much audience attention. This commercial failure cost Peter millions of dollars and eventually led to his bankruptcy. Several years after Dorothy Stratton's death, rumors surfaced that director Peter Bogdanovich had secretly met with Dorothy's younger sister, Louise Stratton, who was then 13 years old. The Stratton family strongly denied these claims and took legal action against the spread of these rumors. However, in 1988, 8 years later, Peter, then 49, actually married Louise Stratton, who was then 20. Louise later stated in interviews that their romance began when she was 18. Peter Bogdanovich and Louise Stratton were married for 13 years, ending in divorce in 2001. Peter never remarried, devoting his life to filmmaking. He died in 2022 at the age of 82. Louise Stratton, who now resides in her hometown of Vancouver, pursued a career as an actress and film director. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Callie Ann Poulton. Callie Ann Poulton was born on September 20, 1989, in Rochester, New York. She was the only child in her family and Callie's parents gave her all their attention and love. When Callie was 3 years old, her parents decided to divorce and Callie lived with her mother. Her father maintained a good relationship with his ex-wife and visited Callie often. Callie's mother, Judy, moved to an apartment complex in the quiet area suburb of Rochester. Although Judy's ex-husband helped take care of Callie, she still had financial difficulties. When Callie was 4 years old, Judy found a part-time job to save money for a trip to Disney World with Callie the following summer. Judy's job was to deliver magazines to customers in her neighborhood. On the evening of May 23, 1994, Judy was getting ready for her job. Judy was sitting at home, putting flyers in the magazine before going out to socialize. At that time, Callie asked permission to go for a walk because she wanted to ride her tricycle on a beautiful evening. Judy looked outside and saw many other children playing in the yard, so Judy agreed to let her daughter go outside for a few minutes. However, when Judy finished getting ready and went outside to call Callie home, she could not find Callie there. Judy looked around but could not find Callie. She searched the yard and her body but could not find her daughter. She also could not hear Callie's tricycle, although it often made a clear noise. As time passed, Judy's worry increased and she began asking neighbors if they had seen Callie. Some reported seeing Callie playing with her friends in the yard, but did not know where she went after that. When the neighbors learned that Callie was missing, they joined in the search but were unable to find Callie or her bicycle. Judy believed that her daughter could not have gone anywhere on her own because she had taught Callie to only ride her bike in their yard. Callie had never told her mother and Callie's little bike could not take her far. Judy also thought that if Callie went out of the yard, she would be discovered immediately. Fearing the worst, Judy decided to contact the police for assistance. Within minutes, the police arrived at the scene and began an urgent search. Firefighters and canine units soon joined the search. The police conducted a house-to-house search and searched the surrounding area. They believed that Callie was still somewhere in the area. Since the kidnapping was a possibility, the police suspected that the kidnappers might be residents of the complex. The reason is that the area has quite strict security controls, so it is unlikely that a stranger would enter the area and snatch Callie out of the yard without anyone noticing. The complex has a total of 300 apartments, and the residents are willing to cooperate with the police, opening their doors for them to search. In case no one is home, the complex manager will provide a spare key for the lock so that the police can check. However, all these efforts do not bring the desired results. No apartment has ever found Callie or her bicycle. The search continued throughout the night and around 4 a.m., the mission was reclassified as a kidnapping. A special police unit took over the project, and the undercovers asked Judy if there was anyone in their lives who might want to harm them. When the police asked about someone who might be involved in Callie's disappearance, Judy quickly met a man in the apartment complex that made her suspicious. The man, Mark, 22 years old, had just moved in with his wife and 1.5-year-old son. During the conversation with Mark, Judy felt that his actions were very strange. During a conversation, Mark said that Judy's daughter was very beautiful, but his tone of voice made Judy feel uncomfortable. What was more worrying was when Mark said that he had seen all the girls in the apartment complex and thought Callie was the prettiest. Mark once asked Judy a very surprising question. He wanted to know if Callie would talk to Judy if someone tried to touch Callie. Judy answered yes and immediately left the yard. Before that, Callie liked to play with Mark on the playground, but since that conversation, Judy has not let her daughter near him, even when she is present. During the conversation with the secrets, Judy recalled another detail. After she went out to look for Callie, she saw Mark walking out to the playground with his son. She asked him if he had seen Callie, and Mark said no. Judy also noticed something strange, that Mark's sneakers were missing their shoelaces, but she did not pay much attention to it at the time. The police decided to mark the matter and took him to the headquarters to determine some issues. Mark denied any involvement in Callie's disappearance and agreed to take a lie detector test. The test results showed that Mark answered truthfully, so he was released. In addition, Judy accidentally provided an alibi for Mark when she saw him playing with her son on the playground at the exact time she was looking for Callie. The police went to Mark's apartment early in the investigation but did not find Callie or Callie's bike. After eliminating Mark as a suspect, the undercover police continued their investigation. They began to investigate Judy to see if she was involved in Callie's disappearance. Judy understood that this was part of the investigation process and answered all of their questions honestly. Callie's disappearance attracted public attention when information about the incident was broadcast on local newspapers and posted on billboards all over the city. The alert received many calls with information, but after a thorough investigation, all of them turned up nothing. However, Judy did not give up and continued to search for Callie. Judy devoted all her time and energy to finding Callie. She contacted the media and did everything she could to find Callie. Some compassionate people have also come forward to help her, not only helping to distribute flyers but also raising a $100,000 reward for any useful information about Callie's disappearance. Judy was invited to appear on the Oprah Winfrey Show. Callie's disappearance was featured on a popular television show about unsolved cases. The police investigated the case for 2 years without success. Although they gathered some clues, nothing helped them find a solution. On August 9, 1996, when a woman called the police and told them about a serious argument between her and her husband. During the call, the woman said she was tired of her husband's strange behavior and wanted a divorce. The man tried to convince her not to do so, and told her about the difficulties he was facing. Suddenly, the man confessed a terrible secret: he had killed Callie. The woman was shocked and took her child to her father's house immediately. She then called 911 and revealed her husband's name as Mark Christie, who was also Judy's neighbor. The detectives were surprised to hear her story, but they soon encountered a serious problem. Under state law, any information shared between spouses is protected and cannot be used as evidence in court. This means that even if Mark tells the truth, the police cannot arrest or question him. Furthermore, the police recalled that Mark's apartment was searched in the early hours of the investigation, and he was in the yard with his child shortly after Callie went missing. This led the police to suspect that Mark did not have enough time to kidnap and kill Callie. After listening to Mark's wife's story, Detective Crow decided to find out more information. Through the investigation, Crow discovered that Mark and his family had moved out of the apartment complex just weeks after Callie went missing. Because the parents of the 2 girls accused Mark of standing naked in front of their house in full view. However, no formal investigation was conducted into this, because by law, Mark was standing in his own home. However, Mark's actions have raised considerable suspicion in the detective's mind. When Detective Crow visits Mark in another city 50 miles from Rochester, he is stopped by Mark's mother. She refuses to allow the detective to see Mark and demands the presence of a lawyer. Mark's mother states that her son will not answer any questions without his lawyer present. Mark seems to know about his wife's report to the police, and Detective Crow realizes that there is little he can do in this situation. Mark's confession to his wife cannot be used as evidence in court. However, Detective Crow is not giving up yet. While talking to Mark's mother, he convinces Mark to agree to answer some questions about Callie's case. Crow suggests that they go to a nearby restaurant and chat over coffee. Mark agrees, but only if Crow takes him to see his lawyer afterward. They stop at a nearby Italian restaurant. During this time, Detective Crow chatted with Mark in a friendly manner, trying not to pressure him. The tactic worked, and Mark began to speak. He expressed remorse for what he had done to Callie, saying that his actions had haunted him for the past 2 years. According to Crow, Mark kept seeing Callie's picture in newspapers and flyers, and her face seemed to follow him everywhere. To avoid scaring Mark, Crow approached the conversation cautiously. Although he had known Mark since the early days of the investigation, this was not their first conversation. Crow told Mark that he had fooled the entire police team. Mark responded that he did not want to boast, but the way he had disposed of the bike was very clever. Mark asked Crow if he wanted to know the details, but he warned that he would only talk about the bike and not reveal any more information. Crow tried to keep his tone light and friendly to avoid scaring Mark and gather as much information as possible. Mark wanted Crow to know that Callie's tricycle had been stored in his apartment for 3 days since Callie had gone missing. Mark knew that the police would search all apartments without a warrant because it was protocol when a child was in danger. Mark quickly decided to disassemble the bike into small parts and hide them in hard-to-find places in the apartment. Mark carefully hid some of the parts in his clothes and put them in the closet, while the other parts were put in small bags and hidden in his car. Mark then slowly disposed of these bags, storing them in places far from the apartment. During this time, the police were stationed at the exit of the apartment complex, checking each bike. Since they were only looking for Callie, these small bags did not attract their attention. Detective Crow sees an opportunity to get a full confession from Mark. So he begins to tell Mark that Callie's death may not have been his fault, but a tragic accident. Mark asks what sentence he could face, and Crow suggests that it could be around 25 years. Mark argues that it would be unfair for him to spend half his life behind bars, away from his wife and son. He also says that he has been living with his own personal grief for the past 2 years, and that should be taken into account when making a decision. Although these words may seem like an excuse, Crow continues his tactics. He advises Mark to ease his grief and tell what really happened. Mark says that he is willing to confess everything, but only after talking to a lawyer. Crow understands that the lawyer will not allow Mark to confess to the crime without evidence against him. So Crow told Mark that if he did not tell the truth, Callie's parents would never know what happened to Callie, or whether Callie suffered before she died. Mark replied, "Callie did not suffer." Crow felt that Mark was ready to confess, so he advised Mark to do the right thing for himself, his family, and God. Upon hearing this, Mark looked at Crow and finally admitted his crime. He reiterated that Callie did not suffer and confessed that he had strangled Callie. Mark added to his story that he had not done anything bad to Callie. However, Mark said that that evening, Callie came to his apartment and wanted to play with her 1.5-year-old son. Since he knew that Callie's mother would not agree to her coming to his house, Mark decided to keep quiet about it. When Callie entered the apartment, Callie went upstairs and went into the room to play with Mark's child. After about 10 minutes, Mark heard Callie's mother calling her name in the yard and became worried. Mark feared that Callie's mother would be angry that he had allowed her into the house without permission. Mark decided to go up to the and strangle Callie with his bare hands. Detective Crow questioned the accuracy of this story. It seemed that Mark had intended to lure Callie into his apartment by taking advantage of his wife's absence, and the excuse of playing with his son may have been just an excuse. There, Mark may have approached Callie, and when he heard Judy calling Callie's name, he feared that Callie would reveal what had just happened. In addition, Crow also recalled the detail that Judy had seen him wearing sneakers without laces, which he could have used as a deadly instrument. This means that the crime was not spontaneous, but planned by Mark. Mark tried to minimize the severity of his crime by changing some details in the story. But Detective Crow understood that if he spoke out his suspicions, Mark might change his mind and refuse to talk about what he did to Callie. So Detective Crow continued to act and listen to the story. Mark claimed that after the murder, he carried Callie's body into the kitchen and left her on the floor. He then took his son outside to create an alibi for himself, in order to divert the police's suspicions. Mark knew that Judy was calling his daughter's name in the yard. In order not to arouse suspicion, Mark wanted Judy to see him. Mark then returned home and placed the laundry basket on top of Callie's body, covering it with clothes. After a few minutes, he put the basket in the trunk of his car and took his son to work. At that time, many people were searching for Callie and no one paid attention to Mark. When he arrived at the company, Mark parked his car and left the laundry basket at the back door of the building. Then he drove forward, then Mark turned back and lied to his co-workers that he had forgotten something at work to cover up his actions. Then Mark climbed onto a tank of liquid coolant and dropped Callie in, before tying a heavy metal object to Callie. Then Mark threw away Callie's clothes, but did not remove Callie earrings. Finally, Mark returned home and joined the search for Callie with other neighbors. Mark took Callie's body, out of his workplace before the police arrived to investigate. When confessing his crime, Mark said that killing Callie was a big mistake. After providing the necessary information to Detective Crow, Mark paid for the meal and left a $2 tip. He then accompanied the detective to the police station and was arrested for murder. Mark's attorney attempted to withdraw his confession, but was unsuccessful. Since Mark had volunteered the information, Detective Crow had not broken any laws. Mark's confession was still admissible. The police went to Mark's workplace and opened the box containing Callie's body. 2 years after Mark killed Callie, Callie's body was still in the box. Due to the high level of decomposition, experts were unable to determine the cause of death or any other details. They were only able to confirm the victim's identity, and Callie's family was finally able to bury Callie. Mark pleaded guilty to the charges and was sentenced to a minimum of 25 years in prison. Mark's lawyer had previously negotiated a deal that would see the kidnapping charges dropped and Mark would face only the murder charge. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Gabby Doolin. Gabby Doolin was born on December 26, 2007, in Scottsville, Kentucky, to her father, Brian Doolin, and mother, Amy Doolin. Scottsville is a small farming community where many people know each other. The town does not have many options for entertainment, so school sports are a big part of the locals' lives, especially soccer. Schools host regular games and tournaments, and for the locals, participating in sports is a tradition. Gabby's family is no exception. She has 2 older brothers, and her parents encouraged their children to participate in sports. When Gabby turned 7 in November 2015, her town prepared for the biggest football game of the year. Her school's football team would be playing against a team from another county. Gabby's older brother was on the football team, and she was on the cheerleading squad. The whole town was looking forward to the game. Gabby's family was going to the game, and Gabby convinced Brian and Amy to let her go with them. They initially planned to leave Gabby at home but eventually agreed to take her. When they got to the stadium, Gabby was excited to see her friends and asked her mom if she could hang out with them. Amy agreed but asked her to stay on campus and play with the other kids. During the entire time, Gabby kept running back and forth between her mom and her friends, playing and having a good time. Gabby also went to Brian in the announcer's room and asked for some money to buy snacks. After a while, Gabby's friends came up to Amy in the stands. Her mom took one look and noticed that Gabby wasn't among them. Gabby's friends asked her if she had seen Gabby and were worried. Amy said she hadn't seen Gabby in a while. She then asked why they were worried, and the girls explained that they had been playing hide and seek. Gabby had been assigned to look for them, and they had been hiding in the restroom. However, as time passed and Gabby had not arrived, the girls decided to leave the hideout to look for her. When they left the hideout, the girls could not find Gabby. They called her name and checked all the places they had played before, but Gabby seemed to have disappeared. The girls began to worry and thought that Gabby might have gone to the stands with her mother. After hearing the story, Amy began to panic and ran to her husband. Amy told Brian that Gabby was missing. Brian immediately began searching the area around the stadium. Meanwhile, Amy went to the snack bar where Gabby wanted to go and began looking for her there. After searching and finding no sign of Gabby outside the waiting areas around the stadium, Brian and Amy returned to the broadcast room and made an announcement over the loudspeaker in the hope that Gabby would hear them. This did not yield any results. Brian and Amy did not give up and continued to ask the people present to let them know if they knew where Gabby was. And several people joined them in the search for Gabby. They then continued to search the area around the stadium and asked the workers to light up the stadium areas with large lights. They also went deep into the surrounding areas of the baseball field, especially the small woods behind it. Despite their efforts, they still did not find her. It had been about a quarter of an hour since Gabby had gone missing, and Brian and Amy decided to call the police. The police arrived shortly after, heard what Gabby's parents and friends had to say, and immediately began an urgent search. While there had been previous missing persons cases, none had involved children. As such, they were rare in small towns, and the police were immediately faced with the worst-case scenario, especially when there were signs of crimes involving children, such as kidnappings and assaults. In that context, they were immediately faced with another difficult problem: the perpetrator could be at the stadium. This fact made the police alert and accelerated the investigation. The police realized that they did not have much time and that everyone would be going home soon. Therefore, they decided to stop the game and lock down the stadium, keeping everyone inside. The police closely guarded all exits to prevent anyone from sneaking out. To avoid disrupting the search efforts, the police did not inform people about what was happening. If people knew that the police were investigating the kidnapping of a 7-year-old girl that had occurred nearby, the situation could have become chaotic. Meanwhile, the state police arrived at the school and began searching the area. In a location in the woods, they stumbled upon a small creek and discovered the body of a young girl. They identified the victim as Gabby and called an ambulance to take the body to the medical examiner's office. After a preliminary examination, the police determined that the girl's cause of death was asphyxiation, as there were obvious marks on her neck. Furthermore, part of the girl's clothing was missing, leading the police to suspect that Gabby had been sexually assaulted. Amy saw an ambulance near the woods and thought that the police had found her daughter, so she rushed there but was stopped by the police. They did not want her to see the horrific scene. The police were investigating the murder and decided to move everyone from the stadium to the school gym. They suspected that the killer might be among them and needed to find a way to identify him. The detectives spoke to Brian and Amy, telling them about what might have happened to Gabby. The detectives also asked Brian and Amy if they had any suspicions about who might have committed this heinous act. They wanted to know if they had noticed anyone suspicious or if anyone had threatened their family. However, Brian and Amy insisted that they had no idea who might have done this. The detectives then spoke to Gabby's friends, asking them if they had seen anything strange. The detectives wanted to know if anyone had been following or watching them. But the girls said they could not recall anything of the sort. The police also took Gabby's friends to the gym and asked them to take a close look at the people present. They hoped that the girls might remember something. However, this did not lead to anything. The detectives believed that Gabby's friends might have seen the kidnapper but were too afraid to point him out or did not realize the significance of what they had seen due to their age. So the detectives asked them to recall every detail of that evening. Finally, one of them recalled that while she and Gabby were in the bathroom, she had seen a man standing near the door. The girl could barely remember what he looked like, except that he was wearing a denim jacket. The police questioned the ticket seller at the game, and he also remembered the man with the denim jacket. He said the man looked strange and drunk. However, the police were still unable to identify the man. The police continued to interview the people who attended the game, and gradually everyone learned why they were being held. When they realized that they might be in the same room as the killer, everyone was scared, especially for the safety of their children. But they still cooperated with the police and answered their questions. Investigators compared the list of names of all the men in the gym to the sex offender registry but found no matches. The police also visited the homes of several sex offenders who lived nearby, but all had solid alibis, and none of them were near the school at the time. Meanwhile, the police continued to interview people at the school and found some important clues. Some people told the police that during the game, they saw a man named Timothy Madden near the girls' restroom, acting suspiciously. He was a local, so many people knew him. Witnesses also said that he was wearing a denim jacket, a description that matched that given by one of Gabby's friends, who also saw a man near the restroom. Another witness was a distant relative of Timothy. He said that Timothy seemed unusual during the game. His youngest son was playing on the field, but Timothy was not paying attention. This was very strange because Timothy was usually very interested in his son's athletic achievements. He even seemed lost. Other witnesses also said that Timothy's behavior seemed strange, which prompted investigators to talk to him. By nightfall, almost everyone at the school had been released. The officers decided to go and question Timothy, but they had first consulted with the local police chief. The police chief had known Timothy since childhood and thought that Timothy was unlikely to commit his crimes, citing that Timothy's criminal record was mostly clean, except for minor traffic fines. The officers then went to Timothy's home, where he lived with his wife and 5 children. When they arrived, the officers knocked on the door and Timothy answered. They asked him if he knew why they were there. He replied that he knew about Gabby's murder but denied any involvement. In an attempt to elicit a response, the detectives asked if he had any explanation for a video recording showing him talking to the victim, Gabby, before she was killed. In fact, no such video existed. Timothy initially said he did not know what the officers were referring to. However, he quickly recanted his statement. He admitted that he had spoken to Gabby that evening near the stadium. He explained that he had stepped outside to smoke a cigarette when a group of girls ran past him. Moments later, Gabby walked by and asked if he had seen her friends while they were playing hide-and-seek and needed to be found. Timothy claimed to have directed her to the girls, and then she left. Detectives were skeptical of Timothy's rapidly changing story. His account indicated that he had been at the scene just minutes before the victim went missing, and there were no witnesses outside the stadium at the time, raising concerns that he may have had the opportunity to commit the crime. Detectives then asked for DNA samples and the clothes he was wearing at the stadium, which Timothy agreed to. However, when examining the clothing, police discovered what appeared to be blood stains on his pants, denim jacket, and underwear. When asked about the stains, Timothy claimed that they were just stains and that the police had made a mistake. Detectives were skeptical, but they needed to wait for the results of DNA analysis before making an arrest. Although the case was a priority for the lab, the analysis took several days to complete. The medical examiner completed an autopsy and confirmed that Gabby's cause of death was indeed strangulation. They then took a biological sample from Timothy, which was sent to the lab for analysis. Police received an unexpected lead in the form of an anonymous letter reporting a suspicious man at the game. The letter included specific details, such as the make and model of the person's car and the license plate number. This allowed investigators to quickly identify the owner of the car. The owner of the car, a student who lived about half an hour's drive from Scottsville, was quickly questioned by police. However, he denied attending the game and claimed not to have heard of the murder. He also provided an alibi, saying he was at work that evening. Police checked his alibi and found it credible, eliminating him as a suspect. However, the anonymous letter writer was never identified, leaving questions about the letter writer's motives. It is possible that someone was trying to frame the innocent student or play a prank on him. Police received another lead after several people reported suspicious behavior by a local 16-year-old boy. He initially claimed to have attended the game, but later denied having done so. He also mentioned witnessing girls playing hide-and-seek. Upon further investigation, detectives discovered that the boy was Timothy Madden's son. Furthermore, they discovered that just 2 weeks before the murder, the boy had gotten into a heated argument with his father, even holding a knife to his father's neck and threatening to kill him. When the police learned of this information, they went to the boy to investigate. However, they needed the boy's parents to be present to conduct the investigation. The boy's mother refused to provide a DNA sample, preventing the police from conducting further investigation. Rumors about this investigation spread quickly in Scottsville. People began to talk about the police investigating the Madden family in connection with Gabby's murder. Various theories were put forward, with some people thinking that one of Madden's older sons might be the culprit. Others suspected Madden himself or thought that he might be covering for his sons. Gabby's parents also heard about these rumors and were shocked. Gabby's father had known Timothy since 3rd grade and knew the family well. Their sons had played football together, and their daughters had cheered together. The two families were very close, even sitting next to each other at games. So Gabby's parents found it hard to believe that anyone in the Madden family could be involved in the murder. After rumors spread throughout the town, the Madden's eldest son, then 20, began exchanging information with local officers on social media using profanity and threats, asking them to keep their distance from his family. Due to the content of his threats, the police were forced to arrest him immediately and discovered that he had an outstanding warrant for his arrest in another town. Specifically, he was suspected of assaulting a teenage girl. After being brought in for questioning, he insisted that he was not the perpetrator of the murder and that he was simply upset about the accusations against his family. Importantly, he said he had been at his cousin's house in a nearby town on the night of the murder. He also agreed to provide a DNA sample to assist in the investigation. Gabby's funeral took place on November 20th, 6 days after the murder, and was attended by hundreds of people from Scottsville and the surrounding areas. They raised a significant amount of money to help Gabby's parents cover funeral expenses. Meanwhile, the DNA analysis of Timothy and his son had been completed at the lab, and the samples had been compared to the blood and semen samples collected. The results of the analysis showed that the DNA evidence was a perfect match. The semen found on Gabby's body belonged to Timothy Madden, and the blood on Timothy's clothing belonged to Gabby. As soon as this information was available, detectives notified Brian and Amy of the discovery of the killer. At the same time, the police also went to Timothy's house and arrested him. When Timothy was taken to the police station, he shouted to reporters that he was innocent. He later explained that the blood on his clothes was from scratching himself while passing through a fence. This contradicted his initial statement to the police that it was not blood but mud. With the DNA evidence matching, the investigators took the case to court, and the prosecution announced that they would seek the death penalty. During the preparation for trial, Timothy's lawyer asserted that his client was innocent and that the source of the evidence was questionable. The lawyer argued that Timothy was at the stadium at the time of the murder to film the game. However, Timothy himself told the police that he had seen Gabby at the same time. The attorney also pointed out that although Gabby's body was found in a creek, Timothy's clothes were dry when he returned to the stadium, raising questions about the accuracy of the evidence. Timothy's mother claimed that her son returned home in clean clothes, did not appear to be upset, and behaved as usual. However, the prosecution argued that the suspect's semen found on the victim's body disproved all of these arguments. The presence of semen could not be explained otherwise, and therefore Timothy's involvement in the case could not be denied. The police believe that Timothy's account of that evening contained some truth. He may have left the stadium during the game and encountered Gabby, who was looking for her friend. Since Gabby knew Timothy well, she may have approached him and asked for information about her friends. That may have been when Timothy came up with a plan, suggesting that the friends had run into the woods behind the baseball field and offering to escort Gabby there. When Gabby and Timothy were only a few hundred meters from the school, Timothy could have attacked Gabby and then returned to his friends. For years after the murder, in 2019, the parties began discussing a plea deal. The prosecution proposed to overturn the death penalty and exchange it for a life sentence on the condition that Timothy admitted his guilt. Brian and Amy agreed to this decision because the wait for trials was a heavy burden for them. They also worried that if the trial began, they would have to attend hearings for months, reliving the pain of their daughter's death all over again. Timothy eventually agreed and confessed. However, the agreement did not require him to reveal the details of what he had done. He only had to admit his guilt. This did not satisfy Gabby's family, who wanted Timothy to fully admit what he had done to their daughter. During Timothy's trial, the atmosphere became tense when Brian loudly yelled at Timothy. Eventually, the judge had to intervene, suspend the trial, and order the men to be separated. As a result, Timothy was sentenced to life in prison and served his sentence in a maximum security prison. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Andrea Lohagin. Andrea Lohagin was born on January 6, 1977, in Bad Belzig, Germany, to a tight-knit family that consisted of her mother, father, and sister. They lived in a newly built residential complex. As children, Andrea and her sister were known for being obedient and diligent in their studies, which made their parents incredibly proud. By the time Andrea turned 16, she had developed into a stunning young woman and an outstanding student, earning her numerous admirers. Andrea and her sister focused primarily on their studies and socializing with friends at parties, avoiding any unwholesome or troubling pursuits. On October 7, 1993, during the autumn break, 16 years old, Andrea spent the day at a local shopping center with her parents. With only 1 year of high school remaining, Andrea was on the cusp of a significant milestone, looking forward to completing her exams and embarking on her journey into adulthood. Andrea harbored dreams of attending university, building a career, and eventually starting a family of her own. The thought of entering this new phase of her life filled her with immense excitement and anticipation. During their outing to the shopping center, Andrea bought new shoes and jeans. She excited to wear them to a party at the club that was coming up soon. That evening, Andrea, a high school student, planned to attend a gathering at the local youth center, where her friends and acquaintances were waiting for her. The center was only a 15-minute walk from Andrea's home in the small town of Bad Belzig. Since the town was considered very safe, with no prior incidents of attacks or crimes, Andrea's parents felt comfortable allowing her to walk to the party alone. Andrea was expected to return home by 10 p.m. to watch a horror movie with her mother, as was their evening routine. However, when Andrea did not come home on time, her family assumed she would be home in a few hours. Andrea's friends who were at the party said she never showed up, which caused them to become worried. This was unusual behavior for Andrea, who was known for being responsible and punctual. She had never been late before, so her friends were worried. Unfortunately, it was difficult to reach Andrea directly, as mobile phones were not widely used at the time, and the youth center didn't have a landline phone. Her friends would have had to leave the party to call her from another location. Nevertheless, the group chose not to jump to conclusions and stayed at the club. They thought Andrea might be dealing with family issues that prevented her from attending the party. Despite the youth center being close by, none of them tried to check on her. The girls assumed Andrea was either running late or grounded at home, and they continued to enjoy the party. However, when Andrea failed to return home by midnight, her mother grew worried. Normally, Andrea would be home by this time, watching another horror movie. At first, Andrea's mother thought she came home late because she had gone out with friends or visited someone's house. But as the hours passed and Andrea didn't show up, her mother became increasingly alarmed. She tried to contact her daughter's friends, with whom Andrea was supposed to be visiting that evening, but none of them were home. This left her unable to get any information about Andrea's whereabouts. Later, one of the girls finally answered, but she had no information about Andrea. The mother became increasingly worried, realizing that her daughter could not stay out so late, as she had to go to school the next day. At 1 a.m., the mother's concern reached a breaking point. She woke up her husband, and they set out in their car at 1:30 a.m. to search for Andrea. They spent hours searching the area around Bad Belzig but found nothing. They visited the youth center, but Andrea wasn't there. Andrea's friends were unable to provide a clear explanation for her disappearance. It was also unknown whether she went missing while heading to the club or after leaving it. Most partygoers had already left, and the remaining youths couldn't provide much information. Around 4 a.m., Andrea's frantic parents reported her disappearance to the local police. However, the police responded slowly and failed to conduct a timely search for Andrea. The police officers initially thought that Andrea had just gone out and would come back home by herself in the morning, once she was sober. However, her parents were certain that something terrible had happened to her. They knew Andrea wouldn't run away because she had no reason to do so. All Andrea's belongings and money were still at home, she wasn't dating anyone, and none of her friends had seen her that night. A week went by before the police started investigating Andrea's disappearance. Up until then, her parents had been searching the town on their own. They had contacted all the local hospitals, but none of them had any information about Andrea. As the search continued without any success, Andrea's parents became increasingly suspicious of a plot of land formerly owned by Andrea's ex-boyfriend's grandfather. Andrea and her ex-boyfriend had broken up shortly before she went missing. There were reports that her ex-boyfriend was struggling to cope with their breakup. The outside of the property appeared abandoned, except for a small, old shed that caught the attention of Andrea's parents. They suspected that Andrea's ex-boyfriend might be connected to her disappearance. They thought it was possible that he had ambushed her on her way to the club, attacked her, and taken her. The parents immediately contacted Andrea's ex-boyfriend, but he denied any involvement. He stated that he was at home for the entire evening and night, and his family members were ready to confirm his alibi. However, Andrea's family didn't believe him. The police were informed by Andrea's parents about a suspicious piece of land owned by her ex-boyfriend's grandfather, and they agreed to investigate. It wasn't until a week after Andrea's disappearance that the police took the investigation seriously. Detectives started questioning the people who were at the youth club on the night Andrea went missing. Many of the partygoers were friends and acquaintances of Andrea, but their statements didn't shed any light on the case. The teenagers who frequented the club often got their dates and days mixed up, making their accounts confusing and unclear. Some people claimed to have seen Andrea at the party, but others disagreed. Initially, investigators thought Andrea might have arrived at the party, then gotten lost in the crowd or left with someone she knew, or possibly been attacked. This theory seemed believable, given that parties with teenagers often involve alcohol, which can lead to incidents when people are leaving. However, after talking to more witnesses, it became clear that Andrea never actually made it to the party, which was confirmed by her friends who were waiting for her. Andrea, who was known for her beauty at school, didn't show up to meet her friends. Detectives believed the accounts from Andrea's closest friends were the most trustworthy. Police have thoroughly checked all routes Andrea might have taken to get to the club. They launched a large-scale search operation, involving trained dogs and many volunteers. Despite their extensive efforts, they couldn't find any signs of Andrea. Numerous press conferences and TV reports were held to ask citizens for help in finding Andrea and warning them of potential danger. Andrea's parents and law enforcement worked together to investigate her disappearance. They made appeals for negotiation in case she was abducted, set up hotlines for witness tips, and offered monetary rewards. However, all efforts were unsuccessful due to a lack of evidence or leads. Many tips were verified, but they turned out to be false. The detectives were only able to piece together a rough timeline of incident leading up to Andrea's disappearance. On the evening of Thursday, October 7, 1993, Andrea returned home from a shopping center with her parents around 6 p.m. She went to her room, listened to music, and looked at her new clothes. The family had dinner together, and Andrea planned to attend a party at the youth club afterwards. She tried to contact a friend to go together, but her friend was already at the club and couldn't be reached. Andrea decided to go alone, and her parents didn't know what she did next. Investigators suspected that Andrea may have been a victim of sexual assault. They thought that her attractive appearance might have caught the attention of a predator, leading to a crime. To investigate, detectives made a list of Andrea's ex-boyfriends and admirers, and checked their alibis. Investigation found that each of the suspects had a reliable alibi for the time of the incident, making it unlikely they were involved. Unfortunately, the surveillance system at the time was relatively underdeveloped, making the investigation more difficult. Detectives started looking for witnesses who might have seen what happened to Andrea. They found out that she had taken a shortcut to the club that evening, and several people had seen her along the way. According to their accounts, Andrea had passed by a group of young people and a couple of teenagers. But she didn't know any of them, so she just kept walking. The last people to see Andrea alive were two boys, 13-years-old Robin and 14-years-old David. By law, their identities and photos were kept private, but detectives were able to track them down and take their statements. The boys said they had simply nodded at Andrea and then gone their separate ways. After that, Andrea seemed to disappear. It became clear that Andrea never made it to the meeting spot with her friends, which meant something terrible must have happened to her on the way. The path she took was a little-known shortcut that mostly only local residents were familiar with. So, the search for suspects focused on people who lived in the nearby houses. Immediately, the police investigation focused on Robin and David, the two teenagers who were the last to see Andrea alive. Both boys came from difficult home environments and lived close to the Andrea family's residence. They were familiar with the path Andrea had taken. Although they were young, Robin and David had a history of minor crimes, including thefts and break-ins. However, there was not enough evidence to accuse them of a serious crime like assault and abduction. Due to Robin and David's young age, the suspicions against them were eventually dropped. The case stalled, and for the next 7 years, there were no new developments. Then, on July 7, 2000, a local resident stumbled upon a horrifying discovery while out for a walk. His dog found a human skull and brought it to him, laying it on the ground. At first, the man thought the skull was a ball, but after he realized it was actually a human skull that had been stripped of its flesh. The skull had a hole in the occipital bone. At first, the resident thought the dog had discovered old remains from World War II, as burials from that time were commonly found in the area. To be safe, the resident informed the police. When detectives received the news, they quickly went to the scene with search dogs. The location where the skull was found belonged to Andrea's former boyfriend. After a lengthy and thorough search, a complete human skeleton was found behind the door of a partially collapsed shed, hidden under a pile of construction debris. The skeleton's poor condition made initial identification impossible. Searching the nearby utility building did not turn up any clues, personal items, pieces of clothing, or other evidence. In recent years, the only person to have gone missing without a trace in the area was Andrea Lohajian. Consequently, most people immediately assumed the remains belonged to her. Andrea's parents described the outfit she wore on the day of her disappearance, including new black platform shoes and jeans purchased that day. However, none of these clothing items were discovered in the shed, which implies that the perpetrators likely got rid of them. It was also possible that Andrea's clothes were torn off shortly before her death, perhaps during an attempted assault. The remains were only identified as Andrea's after a thorough forensic examination, including an analysis of dental records. This allowed Andrea's family to learn the truth about her fate and give her a proper burial. However, it also sparked concerns about how thorough the initial searches were, since her body was found in an area that had already been searched before. A review of the search operation reports showed that investigators had examined the area, including an abandoned shed filled with debris, but they didn't find anything unusual at the time. It is possible that the body was hidden there later, but there is no evidence to confirm this. The investigation initially concentrated on the accounts of witnesses who claimed to have seen Andrea in the company of two teenagers, Robin and David, aged 13 to 14, just before her disappearance. Andrea's vanishing after being seen with Robin and David had seemed suspicious. The boys were questioned again and repeated that they had seen Andrea on the night she disappeared, but had only greeted her and had no involvement in her disappearance. Despite the lack of evidence, but the investigation still points to their involvement in Andrea's disappearance. It seemed unlikely that such young boys could be responsible for her murder, but their involvement couldn't be ruled out entirely. Further investigation revealed that the boys had a connection to the location where Andrea's remains were found. Witnesses had seen Robin and David near the shed on several occasions, and it was discovered that they had access to the inside of the abandoned building. Additionally, eyewitnesses reported seeing the boys at the entrance of the shed on the evening Andrea went missing, raising more questions and increasing suspicions about Robin and David's involvement in the crime. The investigation into the involvement of Robin and David in Andrea's disappearance was dropped due to insufficient evidence and their young age. At the time, detectives didn't think it was plausible for schoolboys to be involved in the crime. The search for Andrea continued. But authorities, media, and her family failed to uncover any valuable information. The case hit a dead end, and it was eventually shelved as unsolved. Without direct evidence pointing to a killer, detectives stopped their search. It wasn't until 2012, when new leadership took over the regional police department, that the case was reopened. Although new evidence and leads were discovered, there still wasn't enough proof to charge anyone. At this point, detectives didn't have a prime suspect. In May 2016, the case took a major turn, when David, a 37-year-old man, died in Berlin from a serious pancreatic disease caused by years of drug addiction and unsettled lifestyle. He was one of the teenagers who had last seen Andrea alive. During a train trip, David suffered a fatal internal hemorrhage, and his death certificate listed natural causes, despite his extensive criminal history. Following David's death, a witness came forward to the authorities, claiming to have information that could solve Andrea's murder case. David's mother was a witness, but she concealed the disturbing truth about her son's involvement in the case. She revealed that on the evening of the murder in 1993, David, then 14, and his 13-year-old friend Robin encountered Andrea while walking on the same path. The two boys, drawn to Andrea's fashionable clothing, decided to attack and rob her. When Andrea recognized them in the darkness, fearing they would be exposed, Robin and David brutally killed her. The investigators were shocked by a sudden turn of events. They had previously suspected Robin and David of a crime, but lacked evidence to prosecute them. The boys' involvement was also questionable due to their young age. Until then, the boys, Robin and David, had gotten into only minor scrapes with the law and had managed to avoid punishment due to their youth. No one suspected that this lack of punishment would embolden them to commit more serious crimes. Years later, 36-year-old Robin was brought in for questioning. His former accomplice, David, had since passed away, so the police had to rely on Robin's testimony. Robin confessed to everything, including the gruesome details of the crime. He asked to speak with his family first, to confess to them, before providing a final statement to the investigators. The detectives agreed to give Robin 48 hours to meet with his family, appreciating his willingness to cooperate. However, they had no idea that Robin had already planned his next move. When he returned to his apartment, his wife was temporarily away. Robin left a note for his wife and a message for the police, detailing his involvement in the attack on Andrea Lohajian. Then, he disappeared without a trace. 2 days later, Robin was declared missing after he failed to show up. On November 4th, 2016, a hunter discovered his body in the mountains. Robin's mutilated body was found at the bottom of a deep ravine. It appeared that Robin had taken his own life, so unable to cope with the guilt he committed in his youth. In his final note, Robin described the horrific details of the crime. Robin never knew why David started the attack, as David never shared his reasons with him. Despite this, Robin was able to recall the rest of what happened during the incident. According to Robin, they had no prior connection to the victim, Andrea Lohajian. When Andrea was walking along a small road near a club, she met Robin and David. The attack was a sudden and spontaneous act of aggression. Andrea probably chose that route to get to the party quickly and save time. When Robin thought back to the encounter, he remembered exchanging friendly greetings with Andrea alongside his friend David. Initially, Robin intended to continue his journey home, but his plans changed unexpectedly. David suddenly and aggressively attacked Andrea, catching both her and Robin off guard. After the assault, Robin and David concealed Andrea's body in a nearby outbuilding adjacent to the youth center. They covered the body with construction materials and then left the area. According to Robin's account, there was no apparent motive for the attack, such as theft or personal gain. The act seemed to be driven by a senseless and extreme aggression. Robin and David both had encounters with drug dealers while they were in school. Additionally, they were both under the influence of drugs on the night the incident occurred. Peter Lemon, the head of the youth center that Andrea was planning to visit, had fond memories of her. He described Andrea as a well-behaved guest who did not drink alcohol and mainly came to the center to play billiards and socialize with friends. Peter was deeply shocked by the violence against Andrea and provided full cooperation to the authorities investigating the incident. Peter had also been told about Robin and David. They often seen loitering near a shed a short distance from the club. There were numerous negative rumors going around about these boys, but Peter couldn't bring himself to believe that such young people were capable of committing such severe offenses. However, it turned out that these very juveniles had been roaming freely. For 20 years, Andrea's disappearance remained unsolved, despite a written confession from Robin and witness testimonies placing Robin and David near the scene of the crime. The investigation lacked direct evidence against the suspects, with no DNA or fingerprints found. Detectives carefully analyzed every word from Robin, including their social media posts and phone contents. The investigators were looking for clues that might suggest the suspects discussed or admitted to the crime. Shortly before his death, David's online accounts revealed ominous posts that seemed to hint at his involvement in Andrea's disappearance. But these leads were considered secondary evidence. It is presumed that David knew the investigation had reopened and was consumed by guilt. Although he did not intend to surrender to authorities, but his life had spiraled downward due to his struggle with drug addiction. David's mother believed her son's death was a sign from fate. She had been afraid to turn him in to the police, and David and his friend Robin were hesitant to share information about their past due to fear of revenge from people they used to associate with. This fear was legitimate considering David had a record of past violent behavior and convictions for drug crimes. Despite accumulating indirect evidence, one aspect of the case to horrify detectives: how could two ordinary 13 and 14 years old boys commit such a heinous crime against Andrea? As a result, Andrea's relatives and the investigators began to suspect that a third person, an adult, might have been involved in the crime, guiding Robin and David. The investigation revealed that Andrea's death was caused by a severe head injury from a blunt object. The severity of the injury suggests it would have taken considerable physical strength to inflict it. The detectives questioned whether Robin and David could overpower an older girl and inflict such an injury. This led them to consider the possibility of an adult accomplice, which was supported by other evidence. A new suspect emerged, a man associated with Robin and David's social circle, who was significantly older. However, his name was not disclosed. Robin's testimonies and pre-death note did not mention a third accomplice, and David's mother denied the possibility. Despite this, some witness statements suggested an adult was involved. Specifically, several witnesses reported seeing a truck driver around the same age as the suspect near the shed around the time of Andrea's disappearance. Investigators were able to identify this individual and connect him to the case. In reality, Andrea and her killers, Robin and David, attended the same school. However, due to their age difference, they didn't have classes, participate in the same activities, or have common friends. They may have crossed paths in the hallways or cafeteria. Andrea may have had prior conflicts with Robin and David that intensified their dislike for her. Robin and David both came from difficult and unstable families, which led them to start using alcohol and drugs at a young age as a way to cope. On the night of the incident, they may have been under the influence of alcohol or drugs, which could have made them more aggressive. What's more remarkable is that Andrea's remains were found on a plot of land owned by a relative of one of the killers, her ex-boyfriend's grandfather. Some people believe that this resemblance cannot be a coincidence, and they suspect the involvement of her ex-boyfriend in the case. The public was shocked and outraged when it was discovered that these very teenagers were involved in the murder. The revelation led to widespread criticism, mainly because detectives had initially dismissed the case in the 1990s, citing the suspect's youth as the reason. If detectives had investigated these teenagers as suspects at the time of the crimes, it is likely that the victims' bodies would have been discovered much sooner. An earlier investigation could have helped authorities bring the killers to justice. The autopsy results showed that Andrea had a fractured skull, but the object used to inflict the injury could not be identified. The investigation relied only on a few small bones of Andrea. All that remained of the skeleton had decomposed. The investigation into the juvenile criminals relied heavily on testimonies from David's mother and notes from Robin, as no direct physical evidence was available. One of the key concerns for detectives after reopening the case was whether David and Robin had committed any new crimes during the 20-plus years they were free. While it was unlikely, the detectives could not rule out this possibility. They spoke to local residents. However, the detectives did find a history of minor crimes committed by David and Robin. Further investigation into these incidents uncovered disturbing secrets. As detectives looked into Robin's potential involvement in a recent serious crime, they discovered a disturbing incident. In January 2014, a French student named Louise went missing after meeting with friends at the university hospital. Louise had arranged to meet her friends over the phone just before leaving home, but she never arrived. When Louise's friends tried calling her, her phone went unanswered. Assuming Louise had urgent matters to attend to, her friends went home, but when Louise didn't show up for work the next day without explanation, her friends became concerned, as this was unusual for her. Louise was a responsible person, but one evening her phone was unreachable, and her whereabouts were unknown. Later, Louise's body was later discovered, and the primary suspect in her murder was identified as Robin, a juvenile who had previously been linked to the murder of Andrea and had subsequently taken his own life. What made the situation even more disturbing was that Louise personally knew Robin, but she had no idea about his dark past. As a result, she became his second victim. Despite the suspicions, proving Robin's involvement in Louise's murder was difficult due to a lack of direct evidence. The case remains unsolved, and many have criticized police for dropping the investigation into Robin and David, suspects in Andrea's 1993 murder, citing the suspect's young age at the time. The carelessness shown in handling the case allowed criminals to commit new crimes with a high likelihood. Robin's past crimes were neglected, and his case was left unsolved, ultimately leading to the death of Louise. Years earlier, Andrea's body was left to decompose, and her case was also neglected. The Andrea family feels that the young perpetrators didn't get the punishment they deserved for their crimes. Even though the killers are dead, but they were still able to live freely for a time and experience the simple joys of life. The motives behind Andrea's murder, like many other details of the case, remain unknown due to a lack of evidence. This case shows that the idea that young people are not capable of carrying out serious crimes is incorrect. Although the truth will eventually come to light, it may be too late to deliver justice. Andrea's youth, full of promise and dreams for the future, was tragically taken. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Danielle Jennings. Danielle Jennings was born on September 16, 1978, in Columbia, South Carolina, United States. She grew up in Stockton, Georgia, with her mother and stepfather. Known for her cheerful and outgoing personality, Danielle faced adulthood early. At the age of 16, she became pregnant but was determined to be a good mother. Danielle's relationship with Carl, the father of her child, ended in divorce. In 1996, she gave birth to her son Tristan at the age of 17, and despite the difficulties ahead, Danielle was determined to provide the best life for herself and her son. Then she met Luis Payano, a man who would become Tristan's father. Danielle and Luis had known each other since they were teenagers, initially as friends, but their relationship developed into love. Luis took care of Danielle and Tristan, and for a time, it seemed like all their problems had been solved. The couple moved in together, and Danielle secured an office job at a landscaping company, a position she was proud to have obtained. In December 1998, Luis proposed to Danielle, and she happily accepted. Her life was on the right track, with a loving son, a fiancé, and promising career prospects. On March 15, 1999, Luis returned home from work to find his fiancée, 20-year-old Danielle Jennings, lying lifeless on the bed in their Ashley Lakes apartment in Norcross, Georgia. Their young son, Tristan, was at daycare at the time. Luis immediately realized Danielle was dead due to her skin color and called 911. When the police arrived, Luis was waiting for them and reported what he had found. He explained that upon entering the apartment, he saw Danielle lying face down on the bed, and when he turned her over, he discovered she was dead. The police naturally suspected Luis, and they took him in for questioning while a team of officers thoroughly examined the crime scene. Danielle was found lying on her back on the bed. Fully clothed, with a sock around her neck, this suggested that the perpetrator intended to kill her, leaving no chance for survival. The fact that the stocking was tied at the back indicated that the perpetrator was behind Danielle when they strangled her. The crime scene showed signs of disarray, with the bed messed up and a dresser drawer open. It's possible that the perpetrator took the stocking from Danielle's drawer. The contents of her purse had been dumped and rummaged through, leading police to consider the possibility of a robbery gone wrong. However, several valuable items, including cameras and jewelry, were left untouched. This led police to speculate that the perpetrator may have intended to steal something but encountered Danielle and decided to kill her to avoid being identified as a witness. The lack of forced entry at the front door and the locked sliding glass door in the backyard raised suspicions that the crime scene might have been staged. Despite searching the surrounding area, police found no evidence. After investigating the crime scene, police discovered that Danielle may have let the killer into her home voluntarily or that the killer had a key to the apartment. As a result, the prime suspect became Danielle's fiancé, Luis Payano. When police started questioning Luis, he displayed intense emotions. The police were aware that romantic relationships can sometimes escalate into anger, leading to devastating consequences. To begin the interrogation, they asked Luis about his whereabouts on the day of Danielle's death. Luis claimed he spent the entire day at work. He last saw Danielle when they both left their apartment at 6:45 a.m., but she returned briefly to retrieve something. According to Luis, Danielle was anxious about an important meeting with management at work and seemed slightly distracted. He also mentioned that Danielle called him at 11:30 a.m. to invite him to lunch, but he declined due to his heavy workload. Luis tried to contact Danielle later that day but couldn't reach her. Concerned, he called her co-workers, who told him she had gone out for lunch but failed to return to work. Luis then contacted their home, where he spoke to someone named Lise, who also hadn't heard from Danielle. Luis left work to check on Danielle at their home in the Ashley Lakes apartments. When he arrived, he found something unsettling: the front door was unlocked. Upon entering, he saw a jar on the floor. During the investigation into Danielle's death, police questioned Luis about his relationship with her. They asked if the couple had frequent arguments or domestic problems. Luis insisted that their relationship was good and that they loved each other very much. Clearly feeling confused, he became frustrated with the questioning, believing that the police were wasting their time by focusing on him. He insisted that they should find the real culprit, who was still at large. Police also spoke to Danielle's friends and family, all of whom sided with Luis. Luis and Danielle were madly in love and were planning their wedding. However, their happiness did not last long. During the investigation into Danielle's case, Luis's co-workers confirmed that he had been at work all day, providing him with a solid alibi and eliminating him as a suspect. During the interrogation, Luis said that Danielle's co-worker Jeff was showing her too much attention and she was unhappy about it. The police immediately went to Danielle's workplace and spoke to her boss. Danielle's boss confirmed to the police that Danielle had complained about an employee named Jeff. Jeff was a middle-aged man who was a manager at the company. Danielle complained to her boss that Jeff was constantly hanging around her, interfering with her work, and behaving inappropriately. There was a significant age difference between Danielle and Jeff. He was 40 years old and she was 20. Jeff invited Danielle to lunch and Danielle told him that she had a fiancé. She refused to go to lunch with Jeff. The company where Danielle worked took her complaints seriously. On the day of her murder, she had a meeting regarding a complaint she had filed with management against Jeff. She was very nervous about it. She feared that her career might be in jeopardy because she was a new employee and Jeff was her manager. Her co-workers mentioned that Danielle had gone home for lunch after this meeting but had not returned. That gave the police a time frame for when Danielle's attack occurred. The investigation revealed Jeff's involvement, especially when it was discovered that he was absent from the office at the time of the crime and did not return until later in the evening. Police focused on Jeff as a suspect, possibly following Danielle home and attacking her when she opened the door, which would explain the lack of signs of entry. Jeff was called in for questioning and asked to describe his relationship with Danielle. He admitted that he invited her to lunch but denied his involvement in her death. Jeff didn't deny liking her, however. He claimed he had not behaved inappropriately towards Danielle and was surprised when she filed a complaint against him. The investigators asked him if Danielle's complaint was a reason for wanting to harm her. His first reaction to this question was anger. He was adamant that he wasn't the one who took her life. Jeff claimed that he couldn't have been the one who attacked Danielle because he had an alibi. According to him, he was with another colleague, and they were driving around the city solving some work issues. They had been together all day, so he couldn't be the one who took Danielle's life. Jeff told investigators the name of the coworker whom he claimed he was with at the time of the crime. The detectives met with this man, and he confirmed Jeff's words, thus they excluded another person from the list of suspects. The next day, investigators received the autopsy report and examined it in the hope of getting some clues that would help them track down the perpetrator. The cause of Danielle's death was asphyxia. It seemed evident that Danielle's attack had taken her by surprise. The investigators concluded that someone had come up to her from behind and pulled the stocking tight until she lost consciousness. After that, the perpetrator tied the stocking in a knot so Danielle could not regain consciousness. There were no defensive injuries on her body. In fact, there were no injuries at all except for the ligature mark on her neck. Perhaps Danielle didn't even see the face of the one who attacked her. The police found no evidence at the crime scene that could help identify the perpetrator. No shoe prints, no DNA, no fingerprints, no hair. There was no evidence to send to the laboratory for analysis. Since the police had no new suspects, they returned to the version that what happened was a robbery that went wrong. They asked Louise to go through the apartment with them again. He carefully examined everything and said that nothing was missing from the apartment. All the things seemed to be in their usual places. However, a few days later, Lou called the police and said he could not find Danielle's wedding ring. He also drew the attention of investigators to another strange detail: the stocking that someone strangled Danielle with did not belong to her. According to Louise, she didn't wear stockings at all. It meant that whoever had done it had brought the stocking with them. Lacking any evidence, the investigators decided to look into Danielle's past. Perhaps what happened to her was connected with her past. They asked her friends about her previous relationships, in particular, her relationship with Carl, the father of her son Tristan. Her best friend told the police about Danielle's ex-boyfriend Eddie. She started dating him when she was already pregnant. Eddie was a violent guy, and as their relationship progressed, he became more domineering and tried to control all aspects of her life. It got to the point where he forbade her to see her friends and family. The relationship with Eddie deteriorated even more after Danielle gave birth to her son. Soon after, Eddie started using illegal substances, and Danielle decided it was time to end this relationship. She moved out and tried to start a new life, but Eddie had other plans. He did not accept rejection and behaved unpredictably. As a result, Danielle had to seek a restraining order against him. He violated it several times, called Danielle, parked near her house, and once even showed up at her work. Danielle's family told investigators that Eddie had called her several times in recent months. He told her to meet with him, but she always hung up. Eddie was the perfect suspect, so detectives tracked him down and brought him in for questioning. The man was hostile, and he wasn't eager to go to the police station. However, Eddie had an alibi. He said that Eddie was towing cars out of state at the time of the murder and that Eddie's boss, along with service logs and other receipts, could back him up. When the police confirmed his alibi, they released Eddie. 3 days after Danielle died, Danielle's neighbor, Kirk, called the police and told them about something that had happened to Kirk the week before the murder. Ms. Kirk said that recently in the apartment complex, residents often encounter a maintenance worker. The maintenance worker said he came to do a repair order. However, Ms. Kirk said that she felt very uncomfortable the whole time he was there because he kept staring at Kirk, as if he was more concerned with her than completing the repair order. The same thing happened to another woman. The maintenance worker insisted that he was there to change a light bulb, when the landlord said there were no bulbs to change. He mumbled and staggered, "Maybe I have the wrong apartment," then backed up and walked away. Police investigations revealed that the complex had several maintenance workers, but the one who matched the descriptions of both women was Calvin Oliver, 42. According to records, Calvin had only started working at the complex in September 1998. At the time of Danielle's murder, 10 residents had reported cash, checks, and other valuables, including jewelry, computers, and guns, missing from their apartments without evidence of forced entry. Some even suggested that someone on the maintenance staff was responsible. Calvin Oliver was brought in for questioning by the police, who initially asked him about a series of burglaries at the Ashley Lakes apartments. Calvin denied any involvement in the burglaries. When asked about Danielle Jennings, he said he had heard about what happened to her but did not know her. The only thing he confessed was that he had worked in her apartment. The police were about to release Calvin for lack of concrete evidence when they ran a final check of Calvin's database. The results were horrifying. They discovered that Calvin had an outstanding warrant in another jurisdiction for failing to appear in court on a theft charge related to the theft of a personal check. According to Georgia Department of Correction records, Calvin had a long-standing adult criminal record dating back to 1974. His convictions included multiple residential burglaries, armed robbery, robbery by force, and at least one count of forcibly pressuring a woman into intimate contact at knife point. As a result, Calvin spent the majority of his life incarcerated. Given his extensive criminal history, it's surprising he was able to get a job at Ashley Lake's apartments. The police took Calvin Oliver into custody, which allowed them to thoroughly investigate his potential involvement in Danielle Jennings's death. As part of their ongoing inquiry into a string of thefts at Ashley Lake's apartments, the police obtained a search warrant for Oliver's apartment. During the search, they discovered stolen items from other residents. And the police discovered Danielle's wedding ring in his home. This discovery directly linked Oliver to Danielle's death. When the police questioned him about the wedding ring, Calvin claimed that he had stolen it about 3 weeks before Danielle's death. However, this claim was proven false. Calvin became a suspect and refused to cooperate with police after being caught lying. At trial, the prosecution argued that Calvin killed Danielle after she caught him breaking into her home. After a 5-day trial that ended on October 13, 2000, the jury returned a guilty verdict on all counts. As a result, Calvin Oliver received a life sentence for the murder of Danielle Jennings and an additional 20 years for the burglary. A subsequent investigation revealed that Ashley Lake Apartments management knew about Calvin's history of run-ins with the law and his lengthy criminal record. Despite this knowledge, they failed to conduct thorough background checks and failed to warn other residents when a series of burglaries occurred. When these facts came to light, Danielle's family filed a lawsuit against Ashley Lake Apartments that they argue that the evidence demonstrates a reckless disregard for the safety of others. After a trial, a jury returned a verdict of more than $13 million for Danielle's wrongful death. The complex's key policy was also flawed, prosecutors said. Employees had access to house keys, and the lockboxes containing keys to the complex's 240 apartments were often left unsecured. Calvin Oliver is now serving a life sentence in prison. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Amanda Plass. Amanda Plass was born on December 11, 1990. She grew up in Choppy, Massachusetts, with her sister Emily and brother Nicholas. Amanda's mother, Michelle Mayes, described her daughter as a hippie and often joked that she was born in the wrong era. In 2011, Amanda worked as a waitress at a Friendly's in Choppy and was dating a 27-year-old carpenter named Seth Green. On August 26, 2011, Seth called 911 to report that he had found Amanda unconscious in the kitchen of her third-floor apartment. During the call, Seth tearfully told the operator that when he arrived, Amanda was lying on the floor, unresponsive, with multiple stab wounds to her body. He did not know how to help and requested the police and an ambulance. When paramedics arrived, they confirmed that Amanda had died from multiple stab wounds, including to her chest, throat, and abdomen. Police cordoned off the home where the crime took place. When they arrived, they found Seth on the porch, crying and unable to calm down. Detectives carefully searched Amanda's apartment. Whoever the perpetrator was, they had escaped but left behind some evidence. The first thing that caught the detectives' attention was the large amount of blood in the kitchen, indicating that the attack had been carried out with a knife. Police also found Nike shoe prints on the floor and handprints on the broken glass window. The motive for this brutal murder remains a mystery. Based on the condition and number of Amanda's injuries, detectives suspect that she may have known her attacker and that the motive was a personal vendetta. Therefore, the first suspect was Amanda's boyfriend, Seth Green. Police took Seth Green in for questioning. It was no surprise that he was the first suspect, given his close relationship with the victim, his blood-stained clothing, and his role in calling 911. The fact that he and Amanda had been dating for less than 2 weeks before her death, and that her family barely knew him, raised suspicions. Seth was 7 years older than Amanda and likely had different views on some issues. But did that lead to an argument that resulted in the brutal crime? This led investigators to suspect that Seth could be the killer, even though he claimed Amanda was dead before he arrived at her apartment. They determined that about 2 hours had passed between Amanda's death and Seth calling 911. That was enough time to cover up evidence and remove the weapon. So the first question detectives had to answer was whether Seth Green had anything to do with Amanda's death. When Seth showed up at the police station, he looked like he had just been through something terrible. He was mourning the death of his girlfriend. Investigators wanted to know if his feelings were genuine or if he was just trying to deflect suspicion from himself. During questioning, Seth said he had been working all day. He had planned to take Amanda to the restaurant where she worked, but couldn't because of his busy schedule. Seth said he didn't know Amanda well because they weren't in a long-term relationship, but he loved her and had no reason to hurt her. Seth worked as a carpenter at a construction site. Investigators began asking him about his tools, implying that he may have used one of them to commit the crime. Seth often used a tool belt at work, which contained a variety of carpentry tools, including a knife. However, he claimed that he always put the tool belt back after work, and that day was no exception. Seth finished the job, changed his clothes and tools, and then went to see Amanda. He understood why he was the most suspected, but he still insisted that he had nothing to do with his girlfriend's death. The police eventually confirmed Seth's alibi. He even passed a lie detector test. When he arrived at the scene, he was wearing construction shoes, which clearly did not match the Nike shoe prints at the scene. In addition, his shoe size was much larger, and the fingerprints on the glasses did not belong to him. With these facts, the police eliminated him as a suspect. Because Amanda tried to resist, she inflicted injuries on the perpetrator. The perpetrator likely suffered scratches on his body in the first weeks after the crime, as a piece of skin belonging to the perpetrator was found under Amanda's fingernails, an important piece of evidence that the police had hoped for. However, when they tested the DNA sample, they found no match in the database. The motive for the crime remains unclear, as many of the items in Amanda's room were still intact. With no signs of forced entry, the police have 2 theories as to how the criminals entered the house. Amanda may have known them and let them in, or she may have forgotten to lock the door. Investigators interviewed Amanda's co-workers and friends and discovered that the case may have involved a love triangle. Before dating Seth, Amanda had been in a relationship with someone else, and the breakup was not smooth because Amanda initiated it. After a while, she started dating Seth, and Amanda's ex-boyfriend did not seem to be happy with this. Jealousy sometimes leads people to act rashly with serious consequences. Investigators checked the information but found this theory to be unlikely. Amanda's ex-boyfriend provided his DNA and fingerprints, neither of which matched the traces found on her body or at the scene. Furthermore, he had a convincing alibi. Police investigated other leads but failed to find a solution to Amanda's death, leaving the investigation at a standstill. Amanda's family was determined to find justice, so they distributed flyers and held community events in the hope that someone would come forward with vital information. Amanda's mother, Michelle, said her daughter was not perfect, but she did not understand why Amanda died and why no one had reported any useful information to the police. Amanda's family faced another emotional challenge. They discovered that several police officers had taken photos of Amanda's body on their phones and shared them with others, including civilians. According to an internal report, Sergeant Keith Lame, a senior officer who was in charge of monitoring the scene at 73 School Street, where Amanda was stabbed to death on August 26, 2011, was one of the photographers. He sent the photos from his cell phone to another sergeant, who then forwarded them to a patrol officer. One officer shared the photo with civilians, including a coach at a youth soccer game. Records show that Keith used his cell phone to take the photo. Keith then forwarded the photo to Sergeant Jeffrey Godair. Sergeant Jeffrey emailed the photo to Patrolman Chad Levesque. Patrolman Chad shared the photo of Amanda, lying on the kitchen floor, with other soccer coaches. As he did so, Chad said, "This is something I have to deal with at work." The photo was shown to at least 3 coaches at a youth soccer game in Agawam the day after the murder, according to Captain William Jebb, the internal affairs officer who wrote the report. At that time, Patrolman Terry Deck, who was assigned to record all traffic in the apartment for state police, took a photo of Amanda's body and emailed it separately to 6 Chicopee police officers. The investigation found that all 6 officers deleted the emails. None of them were punished for wrongdoing, and their names were not listed on criminal records. The others were punished for incompetence and failure to meet work standards. Terry and Keith, who took the photos, received letters of reprimand. Jeffrey and Chad were docked wages. Nearly 2 years after the murder, there was no sign that the investigation was any closer to finding the culprit. So investigators decided to review all the relevant evidence, hoping to find some missing information. After reviewing the evidence and items in Amanda's bedroom, they discovered a dry erase board with a suspicious message. The message read, "Dennis was here on November 8th. Interestingly, November 8th was only about 2 weeks before Amanda's body was discovered. Investigators began to wonder about the man named Dennis and his role in the case. They began to investigate the relationship between Dennis and Amanda by examining phone records and social media posts. While investigating Amanda's apartment, police discovered that her ex-boyfriend had given them a crucial clue. He said that Amanda's apartment had been broken into several times during her absence. In particular, Amanda told him that she suspected a young Puerto Rican man whose name began with the letter D. However, she did not want to report the incident to the police and wanted to resolve the situation herself by talking to the man. Amanda tried to talk to the man about the break-in, but he would not listen. Amanda then informed him that a neighbor had witnessed him at her apartment. She also begged him to return items that were missing from her home. However, the man became angry and left. The main goal of the investigators was to identify Dennis and determine whether he was involved in Amanda's death. They discovered that a man named Dennis Rosa Roman lived near where Amanda died. A search of Dennis's records revealed that he had been convicted of burglary and breaking and entering. However, no fingerprints were found that matched the ones found at Amanda's home. Police tracked Dennis to Westfield, Massachusetts, and asked him to come to the police station to talk, but he refused. During the brief encounter, Dennis appeared very nervous. Surprisingly, Dennis turned himself into the police station in November 2013 at the age of 22. Police questioned Dennis about his connection to Amanda. Although Dennis admitted to knowing Amanda from Choppy, he said he had not seen her in several years. This made sense since Amanda had been dead for some time. Investigators then asked him if he had ever been to Amanda's apartment. He replied that he had never been there and did not really know her well. He only admitted that he sometimes sold Amanda marijuana and had had a few brief interactions with her. During questioning, Dennis agreed to provide an oral DNA sample and provided his shoe size. The results showed that his shoe size matched the shoes found at the crime scene. Officers also noted that Dennis was wearing a pair of Nike Air Max shoes, the same type as the shoes found at the scene but with a different sole pattern. After providing his DNA, Dennis refused to answer further questions and promised to return to the police station in a few days to continue the conversation. Because there was insufficient evidence to arrest him, officers were forced to release him. This raised concerns that he might be attempting to flee, causing the investigation to stall. Further investigation revealed that Amanda had been in telephone contact with Dennis on July 28, 2011. She made 4 calls and received 5 calls from him. At the same time, Dennis changed his initial statement to police, admitting that he had spoken to Amanda at times. According to Dennis, Amanda told him that people frequently broke into her apartment when she was away, but she did not report it to the police because nothing of value was missing. However, investigators had heard this story many times before and now suspected Dennis was behind the break-ins. They believed he was hiding something, as his statement changed and lacked a clear explanation. When shown a photo of the dry erase board that read, "Dennis was here on November 8, 11, Dennis suddenly remembered writing it, contradicting his previous statement that he had never been in Amanda's apartment. Additionally, DNA testing revealed that his DNA matched DNA found under Amanda's fingernails and that his fingerprints were on a glass pane at the crime scene. This evidence confirmed Dennis's connection to the crime. After realizing that too much evidence was directly against him, Dennis changed his story again. He now claimed to have been present at the crime scene and tried to save Amanda from the attacker, implying that someone else was involved. When asked about the man's identity, Dennis refused, citing fear for his safety and that of his family. Instead, he provided a detailed description of the alleged perpetrator, a tall, 170 to 200-pound white male with light skin, blue eyes, wearing old pants and dirty boots, along with a t-shirt that read, "Why drink and drive when you can smoke and fly?" Detectives did not believe Dennis's testimony, as all the evidence pointed to only one person being present at the crime scene when Amanda was stabbed. They arrested Dennis and charged him with the murder of Amanda Plass. The trial began in 2016, nearly 3 years later. Dennis's lawyers defended their client, arguing that although he was present at the crime scene, he was not responsible for Amanda's death. They accused the police of mishandling the investigation and framing Dennis after they failed to investigate thoroughly. Dennis claimed that on the day of Amanda's death, the drug dealer forced him to come to her apartment because Amanda owed the dealer $500 or $600. He claimed that the dealer started stabbing Amanda with a knife when things got bad. Dennis claimed that he wanted to intervene but was unable to stop the dealer. Dennis also claimed that Amanda had grabbed his hand, which is why his DNA was found under her fingernails. Prosecutors presented a different version of events. According to them, Dennis broke into Amanda's apartment while she was away and left a note with his name on her whiteboard. Amanda discovered this, suspected Dennis was the culprit, and called him to ask him to return her stolen belongings, which led to 9 phone calls between Amanda and Dennis. Prosecutors claimed that on the day of the murder, Dennis returned to Amanda's apartment thinking she was at work. However, Amanda had come home and a fight broke out, leading to Dennis killing her. A 12-person jury found Dennis guilty of causing the death of Amanda Plass in July 2016, after hearing 8 days of testimony and deliberating for 5 hours. The court sentenced Dennis to life in prison without parole. The police department's internal investigation into the scandal surrounding the release of Amanda's photo was delayed for years. However, in 2018, Officer Jeffrey Gaudier was finally fired in connection with the case. Although he appealed the decision, he returned to work in 2020. Due to his misconduct and previous disciplinary actions, a commission demoted him to patrol officer. Amanda's law went into effect in Massachusetts on August 4, 2022. The law makes it a misdemeanor for first responders to illegally take photos of a crime scene, punishable by up to a year in jail or a $2,000 fine. Amanda's family also filed a lawsuit against the city of Choppy, which was eventually settled out of court for $100,000. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Vicky Glass. Vicky Glass was born on September 21, 1979 in Stockton-on-Tees, a small town in the northeast of England, on the banks of the River Tees. She has an older sister named Claire, who is 1 year older. When Vicky was 6 years old, her parents, Deborah and Anthony, decided to divorce. Her mother, Deborah, later married another man named Colin Goodall, and Vicky had a half-sister named Cheryl and a brother named Thomas. Although her parents divorced, they continued to live in Stockton. Vicky developed a passion for music from an early age, becoming a big fan of Michael Jackson and the musical Cats. Between the ages of 13 and 18, she joined a local jazz band and often performed with her friends. After graduating from Blackstone High School, Vicky continued her studies at the academy and earned 5 college degrees. However, her life changed dramatically. At 18, Vicky fell in with a bad group of friends and began her drug addiction. Her illegal activities were mainly in the Cannon Park and Gresham areas of Middleborough, near her home. Her illegal activities were mainly in the Cannon Park and Gresham areas of Middleborough, near her hometown. In 1999, Vicky became homeless and contracted severe pneumonia. During this difficult time, her friend introduced her to a man named Patch Claus. This man provided her with a temporary place to heal. For months, Vicky lived with Patch, who cared for her and provided her with medication. However, this support was not enough to help Vicky escape her addiction and unhealthy lifestyle. On September 23, 2000, a few days after her 21st birthday, Vicky left Patch's house with her friend for the last time. She had initially stayed at Cannon Park in Gresham. Vicky also worked as an escort on Set Road in Middleborough, and they drove to Main Road. Main Road was notorious for escorting and illegal activities. After staying there for a while, Vicky and her client left and hailed a ring taxi. The taxi driver then took them to a man's house in Norton, only 3 blocks away from where they had left. Vicky stayed there once more before hailing another taxi to return to Middleborough. The taxi that picked her up was a white Vauxhall Vectra, registration number 790, at 4 a.m. on Sunday, September 24th. She got out at the intersection of Union Road and Ashwood Square, near a pub called The Colleague. From there, Vicky was only a 5-minute walk to Patch's residence, where she lived with the man. However, she did not return home. Patch became concerned when Vicky did not return and began calling, visiting friends and going to places she frequented, but there was no news of her. After 3 days, he contacted the police, and on September 27th, an investigation into Vicky's disappearance was launched. A week after Vicky went missing, on October 5th, the local paper, the Northern Echo, published an article headlined, "Missing Young Woman." In the article, Vicky was described as being about 5 feet 1 inch tall, with blonde hair tied in a ponytail. She was wearing a white t-shirt, light gray trousers and white trainers. The article also quoted a police officer as saying that Vicky was a known prostitute and frequented hot spots. Vicky's family refused to give up and were determined to find out who was behind the incident. In 2018, the police received additional funding to try to find a criminal. On Friday, November 3rd, a man was walking his dog in the village of Demi, 20 miles southwest of Middleborough. At 6 a.m., he walked past a ditch near the main road in the village and discovered the decomposing, unclothed body parts of a woman. He quickly called the police, who arrived and identified the victim as Vicky Glass, a 21-year-old woman who had gone missing. The cause of her death has not yet been determined. North Yorkshire and Cleveland police immediately began an investigation. A team of 40 police officers were sent to the scene to collect evidence and conduct forensic examinations. However, no traces were found at the scene, and the clothes Vicky was wearing when she went missing were not found. Detective Brian Dan, who is leading the investigation, has appealed to journalists to contact anyone who knew Vicky, spoke to her, and has any information that could help the investigation. As Demi was a popular tourist destination, police appealed to anyone who might have been in the area to contact them. Police noted that the car that brought Vicky to the village may have stopped on the roadside outside the village before entering the village and asked people to be aware of this stop. On November 13, 2000, Vicky's mother Deborah addressed the press appealing for witnesses to her daughter's disappearance. Police placed a picture of Vicky in the pub where she was last reported missing, as well as in other areas of the city where sex workers were known to operate. By November 20th, police had interviewed nearly 500 people and received more than 150 statements. Those interviewed included former clients of Vicky and drivers who used the Cannon Park overnight car park where Vicky and other sex workers often worked. The police laid flowers on her grave where her body was found. They then appealed to the public for any information that might help them find the culprit. Two men in Vicky's family tried to stay calm, appealing for the public's cooperation in the investigation. Meanwhile, Vicky's mother, Deborah, was extremely distraught and could not attend the ceremony. After questioning many people, the police found important information. They said that about 12 prostitutes may have information related to Vicky's disappearance. The police began a more thorough investigation. In March, the police began to closely monitor lorry drivers stopping at Cannon Park car park. Next, the police arrested a 39-year-old man from Grimsby, but he was released on bail and his identity is still kept secret from the public. On January 9, 2002, police arrested a 47-year-old man on suspicion of being involved in Vicky's case. 2 days after his arrest, on January 11th, the man's name was given as Eric Coates. He was a resident of South North Yorkshire and lived about 45 miles south of Middleborough. Eric regularly used the services of prostitutes and was a client of Vicky. This was the third time Eric had been questioned about Vicky's disappearance. Police searched his home, where he lived with his parents. Police said Eric could not provide an alibi for his whereabouts on the day Vicky went missing, although he did mention that he may have been at his home because it was his father's birthday that evening. Eric Coates later gave an interview to the Northern Echo, saying that, according to rumors, Vicky had been murdered over a drug debt and that he did not want anyone else to die like that. He also expressed hope that a criminal would be found. Police found no clear evidence and Eric was released without charge. In July 2002, Cleveland police announced their intention to question another suspect, John Taylor. John had been sentenced to life in prison for the kidnap and murder of 16-year-old Leanne Turner in Leeds, West Yorkshire. He kidnapped Leanne Turner while she was shopping in the city centre on Christmas Eve 2000, took her home and brutally murdered her. Leanne's body was found 9 months later by Cleveland Police Inspector Jim Tate. Policeman Jim Tate told the press about the progress of the investigation, but no further information about John Taylor was available in connection with Vicky's case. To mark the second anniversary of Vicky's death, in September 2002, her mother, Deborah, held a press conference appealing for help from the media. In her heartbreaking speech, she shared the pain she had suffered since losing her child and how she had considered suicide because she could not bear the pain. After a long delay, a further investigation into Vicky's case was launched. However, when this investigation was carried out in August 2003, the results of Vicky's autopsy could not determine the cause of death. This was because Vicky's body had decomposed so badly over time that many of her body parts, including major organs and some bones, were missing. The subsequent investigation also found no signs of injury or abuse to Vicky. Later that year, Vicky's mother, Deborah, and stepfather Colin visited the site in Denny where Vicky's body was found to pay their respects. They were followed by reporters from ITV. In a 20-second video, Deborah can be seen fighting back tears as she says Vicky did not deserve to die like that. Gordon Lamp from Cleveland Police also said that despite 10 years having passed, they would continue to try to find the criminal responsible for Vicky's death. 10 years after Vicky's death on September 24, 2010, her parents spoke to reporters for information and discussed the emotional pain caused by the decade-long hunt for her killer. Her mother, Deborah, said she thinks about Vicky every day and cannot get over her loss. Vicky's mother, Deborah, died in 2015 at the age of 55 and will never know who was responsible for her daughter's death. In 2017, Cleveland Police, along with Crime Commissioner Barry Coppinger, applied for special funding from the Home Office to fund the investigation of 3 old criminal cases, including Vicky Glass's case. The story of Vicky Glass, it all started with her disappearance, but the reason why she was killed is still a big question. Currently, the mystery of Vicky's death is still unsolved, and this causes unbearable pain to her family and friends. People continue to search for answers and hope to catch the culprit responsible for Vicky's tragic death, but unfortunately, after all these years, the culprit is still not found. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Sabrina Kudder. Sabrina Kudder was born on December 5, 1982, in a suburb of London. She is of French and Algerian descent from her parents. The combination leads to her exceptionalism. The eldest of 4 children, her family moved to Paris when she was 2 years old, and she grew up there. However, Sabrina's complex personality began to emerge when she went to school. Her former classmates described her as fierce, domineering, self-centered. Sabrina does not make friends easily, and she is especially unfriendly to other smart and beautiful girls, as she sees them as competitors. With her beautiful looks and outstanding height, Sabrina could have pursued a modeling career if she had learned to be friendly with others. However, during her childhood and youth, she often wanted to use others instead of caring about their interests. Sabrina participated in sports and music as a child, but she did not strive and did not achieve success in these areas. While studying at school, Sabrina participated in sports and injured her back. Since then, she had to use prescription painkillers. However, she later tried to obtain painkillers illegally, which led to her arrest and warning. Sabrina focused a lot on herself and her appearance, always craving for attention. She believed that she would have a rich, glamorous, and famous future. For a long time, Sabrina's fantasies had kept her from reality. She believed that her rightful place was in Hollywood. Although Sabrina graduated from the Sorbonne with a degree in English and French literature, since 2006 she has changed careers several times in the fashion industry. She has worked as a stylist, makeup artist, and fashion designer, although she has no real expertise in these fields. Sabrina is a young girl with a charming appearance and a hobby of attracting men. However, she only takes advantage of their feelings, never being serious with them. Instead, she is waiting for the perfect man, a prince, who will fulfill everything she wants. After graduating, Sabrina has not yet determined her life goals. She feels entitled to enjoy life without having to make an effort. However, she enrolls in the prestigious Sorbonne University and works part-time at a sweet shop to earn money. At the sweet shop, Sabrina meets Wissam Madouni, a man 6 years older than her. Wissam is a manager at the headquarters of a large French company and is studying at a prestigious university. He aspires to get a master's degree to advance in his career. Wissam loves Sabrina very much and is willing to fulfill all her wishes. Sabrina also found Wissam attractive and saw him as someone she could control. Besides, she also saw Wissam as a ticket to a wealthy life. He was ambitious and had the potential to be very successful in his career, willing to pamper and please Sabrina. The couple began their relationship in 2000 and after a few months decided to move in together. However, Sabrina quickly revealed her true nature by controlling Wissam in every aspect of his life. If Wissam did not meet her demands, she would get angry and even beat Wissam. Sabrina also openly cheated on Wissam without hiding or justifying her actions. She had feelings for many people, including Wissam's close friends, colleagues, and random acquaintances. Although Wissam tried to end the relationship and leave her many times, he could not escape his deep love for Sabrina. In 2001, Wissam earned a master's degree and was promoted, earning him a substantial income. However, Wissam spent the money on luxury goods and entertaining Sabrina. Wissam and Sabrina were compatriots of French-Algerian origin. According to some reports, in the fall of 2001, the couple held a special Muslim ceremony to marry, which was certified by it issued by the Argento Mosque. The couple had a son, but years later, another man named Anthony Francois claimed to be the father of the child. In 2008, the global financial crisis hit hard, causing the company where Wissam worked to go bankrupt and he lost his high-paying job. At this time, Sabrina decided to move to London without discussing it with Wissam. Wissam no longer had any opportunities or hopes for a career here, so he decided to follow Sabrina to London. Upon arriving in London, Wissam found a job at a large bank. However, Sabrina had difficulty finding opportunities in the fashion industry, as she did not have enough skills, experience, and formal education in this field. After that, Sabrina tried many different jobs to find new opportunities. She worked as a nanny, a call center operator, a cafe worker, and even tried her hand at marketing. Sabrina's career journey turned to musician and composer. Despite her best efforts, Sabrina still had difficulty finding opportunities in the music industry. She participated in many auditions and social events to make connections. At one of these events, Sabrina met Mark Walton, a famous musician and composer, who was a member of the famous boy band Boyzone. After leaving the band, Mark became a successful music producer and collaborated with many famous artists such as Jennifer Lopez, Jessica Simpson, and Lady Gaga. In 2016, Mark's net worth exceeded $1 billion. Mark was exactly the person who helped Sabrina enter the world of fame and luxury. She impressed Mark with her beauty and charm. He also had to admit that he fell in love with her at first sight. Their relationship progressed quickly. Sabrina quickly ended her relationship with Wissam. Nothing stands in Sabrina's way. Within weeks, she moved in with Mark in a luxurious house in an upscale area of London. Mark paid all the bills, including rent, for the lavish house Sabrina chose. For months, Sabrina enjoyed the lavish lifestyle she had long desired, socializing with celebrities, attending high society events, wearing high-fashion clothes, and even appearing in magazines. However, when Sabrina became jealous of every woman around Mark and could not control her behavior, Sabrina's true colors began to show. Sabrina became increasingly demanding of extravagant gifts. Mark pampered her with designer clothes, jewelry, and trips to upscale restaurants and clubs, but that wasn't enough for her. The couple's home constantly changed maids, as Sabrina's paranoia led her to believe they were stealing or trying to seduce Mark. Her irrational behavior became too much for Mark to handle. In 2011, he ended the relationship and moved to California, leaving Sabrina penniless. After breaking up with Mark, Sabrina began giving interviews and accusing Mark of being severely abusive and having a habit of substance abuse. She called Mark constantly, crying and begging him to come back. She even threatened suicide, but he did not change his mind. After realizing that she couldn't win Mark back, Sabrina contacted Wissam, who was now a bank executive. He still loved Sabrina and was willing to forgive her after a period of separation. They reunited and continued living together. When Sabrina became pregnant with Wissam's child, she again informed Mark and claimed that the pregnancy was his. Mark, through his lawyer, expressed his desire to support Sabrina and the unborn child. he offered to pay them monthly child support. However, Sabrina did not agree to the amount of monthly child support that Mark paid. Sabrina wanted to double the child support and Mark did not agree. Mark wanted a paternity test after the child was born. Because Sabrina refused to take a paternity test, Mark did not change the child support. Sabrina sued him. Sabrina made false statements on social media and accused Mark of jealous behavior, threatening her and Wissam, accusing him of breaking into their home, attacking Wissam, and sexually assaulting her in unacceptable ways. However, Sabrina could not prove any of her claims because Mark had been in the United States since their separation, which proved he was not present at the scene. When Mark filed a lawsuit and the police threatened to take action against her, Sabrina stopped making those accusations. After the conflict seemed to have been resolved, she spent a lot of time in Wimbledon, southwest London, with Wissam and her 2 children. Sabrina's life was difficult with the housework and the care of 2 children, so Sabrina decided to hire a nanny to help with the housework. She posted a job ad online and personally conducted the interviews. Most of the candidates did not meet her requirements, and those who did meet her expectations did not stay long in her family. A young French woman named Sophie Lyonnette answered an advertisement for a babysitter. At the time, Sophie was 19 and was back in her home country of France, so the interview was conducted via video call. Sophie agreed to all the terms. Childcare, housekeeping and cooking for a weekly wage of £50. Sophie was born on January 7, 1996, in the small town of Troyes, between Auxerre and Senators. Her parents, Catherine and Patrick Leon, were laborers, and the family was in dire financial straits. After graduating, Sophie received a degree in childcare, but had no intention of settling down in her hometown. Instead, she longed to move to a big city to develop her career. Although Sophie was quiet, unsociable, and had a plain appearance, she was very kind and open-minded, which made her loved by those who knew her. Sophie's eyesight was poor, forcing her to wear glasses all day. During a conversation, Sabrina quickly realized that Sophie was a simple and inexperienced person, which made Sophie the perfect target for Sabrina to take advantage of. Moreover, Sophie was eager to gain experience, so she was willing to work for minimum wage. Sophie, having told her parents that Sabrina was a serious and trustworthy employer, thought that working for Sabrina's family would be a good start to her nanny career. At first, everything seemed to go smoothly. She took care of the children, did the housework responsibly. This peaceful period lasted for a few months and there seemed to be no serious problems. However, things began to change when Wissam lost his job. At that time, Sabrina's family only had the monthly child support from Mark as their main source of income. So the family faced serious financial difficulties, high rent, and basic living expenses. Sabrina, not wanting to give up her luxurious lifestyle, became irritable and aggressive. She often took her anger out on Sophie, the young nanny. Sabrina and Wissam entered a bakery business with the last of their money, but the venture failed. Sabrina then opened a clothing store but did not have enough funds. She asked Mark for a large sum of money, but was flatly refused, leaving her disappointed. What happened next depends on the source. There are different versions of the story. Some sources claim that Sabrina came up with a plan to use Sophie as a weapon to blackmail Mark. She thought of having Sophie as Mark's accomplice and lover, supposedly planted in Sabrina's home to ruin their lives and endanger the children. Sabrina claimed that the provincial idiot Sophie was in love with Mark. She thought that simply recording Sophie's confession on tape or video and presenting it to the police would be enough evidence to demand compensation from Mark for his cruel actions. However, Sophie refused to lie on camera. Another version, due to her mental disorder, claims that Sabrina actually believed in her conspiracy theory and saw Sophie as an enemy and a threat to her family. She allegedly did not force the nanny to lie but truly believed that Sophie was Mark's accomplice who had infiltrated their family to harm them. Whatever the truth, Sophie's life soon became a living nightmare. Sophie first faced long hours of overwork and inadequate pay. She ended up working from dawn to dusk, with no time for herself, effectively imprisoned within the walls of the house. Next, her pay was cut off completely. To prevent her from escaping or returning to France, Sabrina took her passport, effectively making her a captive. All her contact with her family was tightly controlled. The situation got worse. Sophie was barely fed and was constantly forced to lie about Mark, whom she had never met or known. Sophie was insulted and threatened, accused of stealing money and valuables. She was threatened with imprisonment if she did not comply with Sabrina's demands. When threats no longer worked, Sabrina resorted to more brutal and sophisticated methods. Sophie was moved to a cold basement, fed only meager food. She became thin and weak. However, the cold and hunger were not the worst. She suffered physical abuse, subjected to the most painful torture. Sabrina broke Sophie's nose in a violent outburst. This division made the story clearer and easier to understand, and made the reader feel more comfortable. However, Sabrina's cruelty continued to increase, causing Sophie to suffer daily torture. The basement of the house, located in an affluent area of London, became a place of torture for Sophie, where she had no hope of being rescued. A strange event occurred in the late summer of 2017, when Sabrina took Sophie to the police to say that Sophie was ready to testify against Mark. However, Sophie remained silent. When the police decided to talk to Sophie privately, they took her to a separate apartment. At this point, Sabrina was extremely worried, afraid that Sophie would reveal the horrors that were happening at their home, which would implicate her and her husband. Mysteriously, Sophie chose not to reveal anything or seek help. The police response was also strange. Despite seeing a young woman who was malnourished, frightened and weak, they did not call a doctor or psychologist to ensure her health and safety. At the time, 21-year-old Sophie weighed less than 40 kilograms, had lost some of her hair, was missing a front tooth and was walking with a noticeable limp. However, none of this worried the police, who simply sent everyone home. By mid-September, Sophie made her final phone call to her mother. She confessed to her that she wanted to return home but did not have enough money. Sophie's mother, Catherine, only telling her that she would buy her a ticket and asking her to pack her things immediately. This was the last time Sophie spoke to her mother. On the evening of September 20th, 2017, something unexpected happened at Sabrina's house. A neighbor called the police about a fire in the yard, but what worried them was not the fire, but an unpleasant smell coming from the fire. The smell was similar to that of burnt flesh and hair, combined with something that could not be identified. This stench spread through the air and stuck to the clothes and skin of everyone around. When the firefighters and police arrived at the scene, they put out the fire. However, the homeowner appeared calm and did not know why the police and fire service had visited their home. The police saw what looked like a charred human hand in the ashes. Sabrina and Wissam were immediately arrested and the badly burned remains were removed from the fire. The sex and age of the deceased were unknown, but the body was soon identified as Sophie Lyonnette, identified by the melted metal frame embedded in her skull that Sophie always wore. Determining Sophie's cause of death was difficult. Forensic experts found severe injuries to her body, including multiple broken ribs, a broken jaw, and signs of blunt force trauma to her skull and limbs. This suggests that she suffered these injuries while she was alive. Additionally, some of her teeth were missing and her nose was severely damaged, suggesting that she had been severely beaten. The discovery of horrifying videos of abuse inside the house exposed the brutal nature of Sophie's kidnappers. She had been violently attacked in a variety of ways, including with fists, iron wires, golf clubs, and electric shocks. She had also endured humiliation, including being forced to hold her head in a toilet bowl until she suffocated. Experts believe that Sophie may have died of asphyxiation just before being burned at the stake, which would have spared her the terrible pain of being alive while being burned. During the trial, both Sabrina and Wissam denied guilt and showed no remorse for their brutal actions. After the murder, Wissam went to a nearby supermarket to buy fuel to burn the body and cooked dinner for his family, as if the murder had never happened. The couple's first trial began in March 2018. Sabrina attempted to portray herself as the victim, blaming Mark for driving her into a pathological state with his relentless torture. However, medical tests showed that although Sabrina suffered from a mental disorder, she was not insane and fully understood her actions. Wissam was psychologically dependent on Sabrina despite his physical strength. She had a great influence over him and he would blindly listen to her every word. A former lover of Sabrina spoke out during the trial, describing her as a cunning manipulator rather than a crazy woman. On June 26, 2018, the court found Sabrina Khudr and Wissam Maduni guilty of torturing, insulting, and murdering nanny Sophie. The couple were sentenced to life in prison and must serve at least 30 years before being paroled. However, neither of them pleaded guilty. They repeatedly appealed for a lighter sentence. Sabrina even tried to pretend to be insane for a while to be transferred to a hospital instead of prison. But this plan failed. Mark Walton, who attended the trial, expressed remorse for his past relationship with Sabrina. He said she committed all these barbaric crimes to attract attention and make money from him. Mark sends his deepest condolences to Sophie's parents. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery, the case of Michelle Hadley. Michelle Hadley was born on December 20, 1986, in Upland, California. She is the eldest daughter of a business family and was raised in a strict, conservative family. Michelle grew up with a younger sister and had a close relationship with her parents. During her school years, Michelle led a relatively normal life. Michelle's friends describe her as polite and kind, with a straightforward personality who always says what she thinks. Whenever there are disagreements, she tries to resolve them. Michelle was diligent from a young age, consistently completing her tasks and responsibilities. During her high school years, she was in a long-term relationship with a boyfriend. The couple were together for many years and finally decided to get married in 2008. However, she soon discovered that marriage did not bring her the happiness she had hoped for. After 4 years, the couple's relationship began to deteriorate, and they eventually decided to divorce. In 2013, Michelle's life took a turn for the better when she met Ian Diaz, who was 9 years her. For Michelle, the relationship felt like destiny. Ian was a U.S. Marshal, and Michelle worked in marketing. Initially seemed well suited to each other. The two met through an online dating site, and after a whirlwind romance, they decided to move in together by the fall of 2014. Ian proposed to Michelle, and they started making wedding plans. Initially, their marriage seemed perfect. However, Ian's true nature slowly began to emerge. At first, Michelle didn't notice the changes in Ian's behavior and attributed his actions to caring personality. As time went on, Ian's personality changed for the worse. He became more destructive to himself and emotionally hurtful to Michelle, causing her to be shocked, devastated, and extremely confused. Michelle came from a conservative family, and Ian would sometimes ask her to wear revealing clothes that made her feel uncomfortable. Despite her reservations, Michelle went along with her husband's requests, thinking he was just trying to spice up their relationship. However, Ian noticed that she gave in easily and began making even more daring requests. Eventually, Ian asked Michelle to get her belly button pierced, a request she was initially hesitant about, but ultimately agreed to. However, Ian increasingly pushed the limits. His requests began to become more and more strange. He asked Michelle to quit her marketing job and work at Disneyland, a place he loved and had previously worked at as a deputy U.S. Marshal. Perhaps Ian wanted to keep an eye on his wife, and working somewhere where he still had a relationship made sense to him. Ian justified his suggestion by saying he wanted Michelle to be safer, but in reality, he was seeking greater control over her life. Initially, Michelle found the request peculiar, but driven by her love for her husband and her desire to please she agreed. However, as time passed, Michelle began to feel uneasy about the arrangement. She found herself becoming a different person, one that she no longer recognized. She then confided in her husband. But instead of listening to her, he became angry and violent. Afterward, Michelle and Ian decided to purchase a condominium together, hoping that owning a home would strengthen their bond. This decision was made about 2 years after they first met. The couple began their search for a condo in 2015 and eventually found one they liked in downtown Anaheim, although it was slightly more expensive than they had budgeted for, at $470,000. At the time of the purchase, Michelle had no idea that Ian didn't plan to contribute to the mortgage payments. When the first payment was due, Ian claimed he was experiencing financial difficulties, but he assured Michelle that he would pay the next month's installment. She proceeded with the $144,000 down payment. She handled the paperwork and finalized the purchase, thinking everything was in order. However, in retrospect, it was clear that their relationship was already deteriorating. The situation worsened after they bought the condo. Although the deed had both of their names on it, it became evident that Ian wanted the condo for himself, while Michelle was the only one shouldering the mortgage payments. One summer evening in 2015, Michelle and Ian got into a violent altercation in the car. Ian physically attacked Michelle, causing minor injuries. In the aftermath, Michelle composed a distressing email to her sister detailing the events, but unfortunately never sent it. As the summer drew to a close, nearly 2 months after purchasing their condo, Michelle decided to leave Ian and move in with her parents. Despite no longer living in the condo, Michelle was still responsible for paying the mortgage. This decision would later become a contentious issue in their relationship. In fact, Ian continued to skip the mortgage payments, infuriating Michelle. Around this time, Michelle had stepped down from her high-paying job and was working at Disneyland, a position she disliked. Furthermore, her new job paid significantly less than her previous one. In an attempt to address the mortgage issue amicably, Michelle reached out to Ian via email, phone calls, and texts. However, he deliberately ignored her messages, which escalated the situation. The tension between them reached a boiling point, prompting Michelle to confront Ian in person. Ian's answer was shocking. He never planned to pay the mortgage, which made Michelle furious. Michelle found herself in a difficult situation and decided to take action. She emailed Ian, warning him that his behavior would have serious consequences if he continued. However, this email only made Ian angrier, and he responded by filing a restraining order against Michelle. The police did not fully support Ian's request, as they determined he shared some blame in the matter. When Michelle discovered Ian's request to obtain a restraining order, she countered by pointing out his failure to pay the mortgage on their jointly owned condominium. To resolve the issue, they agreed to hire property lawyers and eventually came to a settlement. The court ruling ultimately favored Michelle, ordering Ian to pay the outstanding mortgage balance. If Ian failed to comply, he would face an additional penalty. Although the ruling was unfavorable for Ian, he had no choice but to abide by the court's decision. This situation dragged on for a year, and by 2016, Michelle and Ian had officially separated. This marked a new beginning for Michelle, freeing her from a toxic relationship. In contrast, Ian remained bitter about the outcome, continuing to live in the condo and pay the mortgage. Ian's life had become increasingly complicated due to the condo situation, so he decided to start using dating apps again to try to move on. This was how he met Angela Connell, a woman he thought was perfect for him. Angela was born in 1985 in Phoenix, Arizona. She attended a Catholic high school and later graduated from Arizona State University in 2006. Ian and Angela met in January 2016. And they immediately have feelings for each other. Their relationship progressed quickly. Ian proposed within a month, and soon Angela moved into his condo. It seemed as if they were meant to be together. By May 2016, Angela announced she was expecting twins, which made Ian incredibly happy. However, their happiness was short-lived when Angela received a threatening anonymous email saying she was not the right person for Ian. Angela was taken aback by the message and initially suspected it might be from her ex-boyfriend, Jason Rayburn, with whom she had a tumultuous relationship before marrying Ian. However, something didn't add up. She had cut off all contact with Jason after their breakup, so he doesn't know about her new relationship with Ian. It wasn't until Ian brought up the topic of the condo, which was purchased by his ex, Michelle, that Angela realized Michelle might be the one sending the messages. As time passed, Angela received more emails from different accounts. The emails all contained similar information but were worded differently. Intrigued, Angela responded to one of the messages, asking the sender to reveal their identity. To her surprise, the sender claimed to be Michelle Hadley. Angela demanded that Michelle stop contacting her, but the emails continued. The tone of the subsequent emails escalated, leaving Angela feeling threatened and fearful for her life. Afterward, she decided not to take any chances and sought a restraining order against Michelle. The incident took place on June 1, 2016. Angela stated to the police that an email from Michelle had left her feeling fearful and anxious. She expressed concern about leaving her home due to the threatening content of the emails, and she feared being attacked or killed if did so. In response to the severity of the situation, the court granted a restraining order against Michelle. A short time later, in June 2016, Michelle seemed to have moved past the troubles of her previous relationship. One evening, after meeting a friend, she returned home to find a team of police officers waiting for her in her driveway. Michelle was taken aback but cooperated peacefully with the officers and was taken in for questioning regarding a restraining charge. During the interrogation, Michelle denied knowing Angela or sending the threatening emails mentioned by the officers. She claimed she was being framed, citing 2 alerts she received a week earlier. The first was from Google, stating her email account had been shut down. The second was from Microsoft, stating her primary email was being used as a recovery email for multiple unknown email addresses. Michelle reported this suspicious activity to the Anaheim Police Department, suspecting her ex-husband of impersonating her. However, her concerns were dismissed by the police, who believed Michelle was lying. As a result, a restraining order was issued against Michelle, but she was unaware that this was just the start of a more complex situation. Things took a dark turn after Michelle was served with a restraining order. However, things became more intense. Angela soon receiving emails responding to a Craigslist ad that she hadn't posted herself. The disturbing ads described a sexual coercion fantasy and included intimate details about Angela's life. The emails contained her phone number, condo address, and even the breed of her dog. It was clear that someone had created an account in her name, but what was particularly unsettling was how they had access to such precise information. Ian and Michelle were the only ones who knew Angela's condo address. She suspected Michelle, but thought that was unlikely. Fear had taken over her so much that she didn't even want to leave her house. The thought of someone knowing her address and watching her all the time made her extremely uneasy. Not knowing who was behind it made her feel even more scared. On June 24, 2016, just days after posting the Craigslist ad, Angela was attacked, and her life was put in danger. Bruises covered her neck, her clothes were torn, and she had a severe head injury from being slammed into a wall. Despite her condition, Angela quickly called 911. When the police arrived, they questioned her about the assault, and Angela revealed that Michelle was her attacker. This time, the police decided to take stronger action against Michelle. They believed that a restraining order would not be enough to protect Angela, and they made the decision to arrest Michelle. While Michelle was in jail, she managed to contact her parents, who are conservative. Her parents were determined to handle the situation discreetly. They posted Michelle's bail of $10,000, made possible by their financial stability as successful business owners. Angela started receiving harassing emails after the incidents. Interestingly, the emails she received came from Michelle's personal email address. However, it's unclear if Michelle actually sent them. On July 13, Angela contacted 911 because she saw a strange man outside her condo. When the police arrived, the man claimed he was responding to a Craigslist ad posted under Angela's name that featured explicit content. Further investigation led the police to discover that the ad was created from an account linked to Michelle. This raised questions about Michelle's potential involvement and whether she may have provided false information to the police. On the other hand, it's possible that someone was using Michelle's name to mislead the authorities. The next day, on July 14, Michelle was arrested again, with bail set at $1 million, an amount her parents couldn't afford to pay. Michelle strongly denied sending the emails and creating the Craigslist ads. Her parents believed her because they knew she wouldn't send threats to anyone. Concerned about the potential consequences, Michelle's parents hired a lawyer, thinking that the person behind the threats could continue to get their daughter arrested. While Michelle was in jail for the second time, the threats and emails aimed at Angela stopped again. For 3 months, everything seemed calm for Angela. Meanwhile, Michelle's parents were trying to figure out who was impersonating their daughter. They gathered their daughter's records, including school and hospital records, to see if they could find any weaknesses in the case against her. This led them to find important evidence. Michelle was in the hospital on the same day the first emails were sent, making it impossible for her to have sent them herself. Michelle's parents were given new hope when they received an update about her situation. They had been trying to track down the source of the emails they were receiving, which had encrypted IP addresses. To do this, Michelle's father downloaded various software programs to help identify the senders. Then, in a surprising turn of events, her parents received a phone call with some unexpected news: Michelle's bail had been posted. The surprising twist was that the person who posted the $1 million bail was Ian, the same person who had been treating Michelle badly. This took place on September 30, 2016, when Ian presented the police with the bail money. Michelle and her family were stunned by this development and couldn't understand why Ian would do such a thing. They had many unanswered questions about his motives. Was he trying to make amends for his past behavior, or was there another reason behind his actions? After Michelle's release on bail, she and her family sought answers. Ian then revealed shocking information, claiming Angela had framed Michelle for sending threatening emails. Angela allegedly used fake email accounts in Michelle's name to send the emails to herself. Angela also posted ads on Craigslist, making it seem like Michelle was responsible. The details in the ads could only have been known by Ian and Angela. Further investigation revealed that Angela's bruises found on June 24, 2016, were self-inflicted. Ian discovered CCTV footage that supported this claim. Ian also uncovered Angela's history of deception. She had been lying since the day they met, and one notable example was her fake pregnancy. Ian found evidence that Angela had bought a fake sonogram of twins on Etsy for $7.50 and a positive pregnancy test kit to support her fabricated story. Angela's motivation to ruin Michelle's life stems from her meeting with Ian in 2015. Ian frequently discussed Michelle and an incident involving a condo. This sparked Angela's curiosity, prompting her to investigate Michelle's past. She discovered that Michelle came from a wealthy background, which led Angela to view her as an opportunity for personal gain. Ian, who was married to Michelle at the time, sought revenge due to a past dispute over the condo's mortgage. The incident had left him feeling bitter, and he was furious about being forced to pay the mortgage following Michelle's countersuit. Together, Angela and Ian devised a plan to bring Michelle down. Ian shared Michelle's email address with Angela, and they began plotting to frame her and have her arrested. In an effort to conceal their scheme, Angela and Ian created separate email addresses to communicate with each other. They also opened 6 fake email accounts in Michelle's name using virtual private networks, VPNs. This is the reason Michelle noticed Google alerts about email addresses in her name that she had not created. Unbeknownst to Michelle, Angela was behind these suspicious activities. When Michelle got a restraining order against, she still felt it wasn't enough, because she wanted Michelle gone forever. Angela devised a plan to escalate the situation further. She created a fake Craigslist profile in Michelle's name, posting an ad that invited men to engage in a sex act at Michelle's home. However, the flaws in the plan led to Ian, Angela's husband, confessing the truth. Once the truth came to light, the police secured a search warrant for Angela's devices. To their amazement, when they checked Angela's belongings, they discovered that everything Ian said was true. A total of 21 threatening emails were discovered, with most being sent from Angela and Ian's residence. Further investigation of the emails revealed that some were sent from Arizona. It was ultimately discovered that Angela had visited her father in Arizona during the same period the emails were sent. After discovering these shocking evidence, investigators decided to look into Angela's past. They soon found that she had committed similar crimes before. In 2013, Angela had faked her identity in a serious illness while dating Jason Rayburn, a California state trooper. Angela claimed to be an attorney and said she had cervical cancer. However, her story didn't add up, and Jason became suspicious. He dug deeper and made a disturbing discovery. Angela had lied about having cancer and being a lawyer. This ended her relationship with Jason. The deception wasn't made public until 2019, nearly 3 years later. On January 6, 2019, Angela was detained. She pleaded guilty to 10 felonies, including perjury and false imprisonment. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison. The Orange County District Attorney's Office quickly cleared Michelle's name of the wrongful charges. 3 days later, Michelle's assault and threatening charges were officially dropped. This marked the end of a long and painful ordeal for Michelle. Although the ordeal has ended, Michelle still bears the scars of her wrongful conviction, including the time she spent in jail. She had to give up her MBA classes and lost her job after being wrongfully arrested. After the charges were cleared, Michelle's life began to improve. She earned her MBA and got a good job in marketing at a cosmetics company. She then moved to New York to live with her sister, and her life was better than ever. Ian, on the other hand, separated from Angela and sold their condo for $500,000. However, in 2021, Ian's life took a turn for the worse. He was arrested and charged with planning, carrying out the plot to frame Michelle. As a result, he received a 5-year prison sentence and was convicted of perjury.